Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. First order of business is the 37th special session. I need to get a motion to go into special session.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We're in special session. First order of business is the approval of an ordinance, City of Hagerstown 2018 general obligation bonds.
Mr. Mayor, who would move to approve an enabling ordinance authorizing the City of Hagerstown to issue and sell from time to time upon its full faith and credit general obligation bonds in one or more series and an aggregate original principal amount not to exceed $1.545 million. Proceeds of the bond will be used to pay costs of the projects identified in Section 3B of the ordinance. Proceeds per amount are allocated by fund as follows. General Fund, $1.265 million. Parking Fund, $0.28 million, for a total $1.545 million. That portion of principal interest and any allocated issuance costs associated with the parking fund will be payable in the first instance from revenues accounted for in such fund, but the bonds will be backed by a pledge of the city's full faith and credit and unlimited taxing power. Staff is hereby directed to work with the city's financial advisor and bond counsel to determine whether a direct purchase transaction for the bonds as contemplated by the ordinance remains the best financing option for the city, and to develop the necessary detailed resolution and other documents required to prepare for the sale of the bonds as contemplated by the ordinance, including any request for proposals to determine the purchaser. As specified in the ordinance, details and authorizations regarding the amount, timing, final method of sale or sales, and other sale details will be outlined in a detailed resolution to be presented to this body for approval at a future date prior to the issuance of the bonds. The ordinance also authorizes the issuance and sale from time to time upon the city's full faith and credit of one general obligation bond anticipation notes in one or more series in an aggregate original principal amount not to exceed $1.545 million to fund project costs on an interim basis, and two general obligation refunding bonds in an aggregate original principal amount not exceeding 130% of the aggregate principal amount of the bonds being refunded in order to reduce debt service costs or achieve debt service restructuring. Details of any such general obligation bond anticipation notes or general obligation refunding bonds are authorized to be determined or provided for by resolution. Any series of such general obligation bonds, bond anticipation notes, or refunding bonds may be issued as a single bond.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Approval of an ordinance amending and supplementing existing City of Hagerstown general obligation borrowing authority for water system purposes.
Mr. Mayor, who would move to approve an ordinance amending and supplementing ordinance number 0-16-15 passed by the council on July 26, 2016, approved by the mayor on July 26, 2016, and effective on August 26, 2016. Ordinance number 0-16-15. In order to increase the maximum aggregate of principal amount of each of the one general obligation bonds and two general obligation bond anticipation notes authorized to be issued pursuant to ordinance number 0-16-15 and referred to therein respectively as the bonds and the bands, in order to finance, reimburse, or refinance costs of the two projects identified in the fiscal year 2017 budget as one, R.C. Wilson traveling screen replacement, and two, pump station improvements collectively identified in ordinance number 0-16-15, together with related costs as the project from $1 million to $1.1 million. The project was delayed. Project cost have increased in the Maryland Water Quality Administration. The administration recently indicated that it can lend the city $1.02128 million for project purposes. The 2018 ordinance authorizes up to $1.1 million to be borrowed for both interim financing and permanent financing purposes in case the administration determines it can lend the city more than $1.02128 million. The 2018 ordinance also expands the rules of construction set forth in Section 1 of the ordinance number 0-16-15, debt service payable on any bonds, bands, or refunding bonds authorized by ordinance number 0-16-15, as amended and supplemented by the 2018 ordinance, will remain payable in the first instance from water supply system revenues and to the extent required by the applicable purchaser, wastewater system revenues, all to the extent required by the applicable. All to the extent any such revenues are available for such purpose by any such obligations will be backed by a pledge of the city's full faith and credit and unlimited taxing power, and anticipated that no bans will be necessary and that the only loan funding for project purposes will be provided by the administration, which will be evidenced by one or more series of bonds issued by the city to the administration. Staff is hereby directed to work with the city's bond counsel to develop the necessary detailed resolution and other documents required to prepare for the sale to the administration of the bonds contemplated by ordinance number 0-16-15 as amended and supplemented as specified in ordinance number 0-16-15, details and authorizations regarding the final borrowed amount, timing, amortization, and other details will be outlined in a detailed resolution to be presented to this body for approval at a future date prior to the issuance of any bonds.
Second.
Give that to Shelley. Discussion?
Someday, not today, you can let us know, since we're voting on what a general obligation bond anticipation vote is.
Anybody else? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Adoption of comprehensive plan update, Vision Hagerstown 2035.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and city council to approve the attached resolution, which will adopt the planning commission's recommended comprehensive plan update, Vision Hagerstown 2035. This approval will conclude the 3-year in-house update to the 2008 comprehensive plan. All state mandated public input processes and timing of action by the mayor and city council have been met.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Approval of a loan to the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, DBMH, for down payment to purchase 465 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move to approve a loan not to exceed $12,000 to the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, DBHM, for the down payment to purchase the property at 465 Pennsylvania Avenue. This site will be the future permanent home of the DBHM. This loan represents a 10% good faith deposit to purchase the property for $120,000. The DBHM will submit a grant request in the amount of $120,000 to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. When the grant is awarded, the DBHM will reimburse the city of Hagerstown the full $12,000. If the grant is not awarded, DBHM will reimburse the city of Hagerstown the full $12,000 with terms for reimbursement to be finalized at a later date. Second.
Second.
Shelley and Emily. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. Come out of the special session and go to the work session. The first item is the Maryland Theater update. Jessica Green, Executive Director.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. It's a real pleasure to be able to sit here today. I was just thinking, it's just amazing, just over 2 years ago, we asked to move forward with an idea, a concept of expanding the Maryland Theater, and to think about all the individuals that have been part of pushing us forward, from local, county, state government, private businesses, volunteers, and the arts community, and many others. It's just amazing to see that we're here today. And I want to just say thank you. The theater has worked closely with the council and the mayor for many years now in a restoration and a rebuilding process. And to know that we're here at one more step closer to fulfilling a dream of the community of rebuilding the Maryland Theater's front side is pretty amazing. So first of all, thank you very much. I just want to tell you the theater and the staff, the board members, and all of us have been trying to be very good stewards of not only the time that we sit before you, taking the decisions that you've given us, the finances you've provided over many years, and the transparency the theater's been throughout the process. And I appreciate Valerie being on our board. She's been a great asset to helping the theater focus on things that are important. When I look forward in the next year, we could actually be cutting a ribbon in October 2019, opening this new performing arts complex. And the great thing is, the day we open the door, the day our first staff or our performance or activity is there, has a direct immediate impact on our downtown business community and our city of Hagerstown. So I just appreciate everything that the council's done, the mayor's done for so many years, and the widespread support. When you hear about the level of pledges that have been given, this is a very popular project that is being picked up to the community. And Ms. Green, our executive director, is going to go over a couple slides to kind of give you an update about more details, the finances, where we are, and then moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Benita.
My job here is to make sure I do the slides right.
The first slide is just some basics on the expansion. I know it might be repetitive for some of you, but I know there are some new faces at the table, so I'll go through this first page quickly. Basically, there are two main goals of our expansion project. The first is to expand our space. Currently, our space is the stage and a very small lobby, so once that stage is booked and scheduled, we can't produce any additional revenues. So we are providing an additional 6 spaces for rent, and really hoping to become that hub of all things arts, education, and business with a full performing arts complex. And again, those 6 spaces will create the additional sustainable revenue streams in order to preserve the Maryland Theater for another century and beyond. Obviously generating additional events in the city of Hagerstown, well beyond just what we are known for now, which is performances, private events, business seminars, conferences, things of that sort. The second part of the expansion goal is really to enhance the historic Maryland Theater. As you know, you have many choices in entertainment, and so we need to stay relevant and competitive with those entertainment venues around us. Having 2 women's restrooms for 600 seats on the main level, that math doesn't work. Not having an elevator doesn't work. Having 1 main entrance to the historic theater with almost 1,300 seats doesn't work. So improving all of those areas, bringing our box office and our concession stations on site instead of in a separate building, and also improving our emergency egress pathways is a major part of the expansion. So an update on our schedule, which is still fairly fluid. Bids are due next Monday. Our committee will be meeting to review them throughout that week and finalizing on April 16th. We will bring those final decisions to the Maryland Theater Board of Directors on April 26th. Still pushing for a tentative construction start date July 1st, and as Benito mentioned, that puts us nearly 18 months later of October 2019 for completion. So a financial update on the project, and again, because our bids are not due until next week, this is based on cost estimates that came to us at 50% construction drawings last summer. So these could change a bit either way after next week. But initially, we had about $12 million in construction and about $1 million in design. That was our initial very flexible budget. So we've received up to $500,000 from the county and the city for design, and I'll talk in the next slide about how we are not going to use all of that. That overall project price of just over $13 million does include an inspection. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his title. An inspector from the county, and they are donating those services in kind. He will be on site each and every day because the theater staff does not know how to run a construction project. So he will be our eyes and ears of the project. He won't make any formal decisions, but he'll provide us with information and be on site every day. And they are donating his services for $227,000. To date, just in the last 6 months, we have just over $3.6 million in signed pledges. These are donations coming in, some immediately, some payable over 5 years from local individuals, business owners, and local businesses. We still have the $5 million promised by the state of Maryland, by Governor Hogan, that's payable over 5 years. The county has graciously offered to forward fund that, so that money is available to us starting this July. We have been awarded a $300,000 grant thanks to city staff working on that grant application from DHCD, and we expect to be awarded an additional $300,000 this fiscal year as well, so that's why you see that $600,000 number. And recently, we were informed that we have been awarded a $200,000 bond bill towards the construction of the project, thanks to Senator Serafini. So that leaves our remaining gap at just over $2.5 million. We do have 2 large donors that we're working with to make a final determination. We have at least 4 large grant applications out there that will be awarded late spring, early summer. There are still a lot of things in the works. Our capital campaign committee is obviously working diligently because based on this estimate, we're approximately 85% funded. So what we are here today for is twofold. And the first one is, may get a little sticky, and Valerie, please feel free to jump in. But basically, almost 2 years ago, when the city and the county agreed to split the cost of our design phase 50-50, you awarded up to $500,000. To date, we estimate that the design phase will cost $720,000. So we are asking for your approval to use the remaining $140,000 in your portion of $500,000 towards the construction administration costs. And we're asking you to split that 50-50 with the county, just as we did with the design phase. Construction administration will be done by the same architectural firm that designed the building, and the theater representatives and the county both agree that it's an absolute critical phase that Grimm and Parker be involved with to see the project through, to see that it's done according to the drawings that they developed. And so we're asking for your approval to use $70,000 of the remaining balance, which is $140,000, towards those construction administration fees. Our second request is just for you to further consider what we brought to you in October of 2017, a request for additional funding, not for design, but for the construction phase of the project. We understand that Valerie and city staff Michelle have been working to finalize the budget for the next fiscal year, and I've just shared with you that really every pledge remains incredibly important to the success of this project. We really need to be fully funded to move forward, and in order to meet that completion date and to start this July, we need to hire a general contractor in very early May. So we're really asking you to consider that request of additional construction grant funding. And again, that can be paid in one installment or over the 5 years as well. We do have financing available that will cover that.
Jessica, you have, that's okay. You indicated you have potential for 2 major contributors and a number of grants out.
Yes.
Do you have any idea when you'll have some feel for those issues?
We should, 3 of the 4 grants we should hear back on in the next 60 days.
How about the donors?
They're donors.
Just
When
don't
they
know.
want to make their
Okay.
decision, they will. And quite honestly, we were given advice from the fundraising firm that we worked with that many donors don't come forward until they see a project break ground. So while that's promising, it doesn't help you to break ground. So.
And the one thing,
A suggestion may be for some of your bigger donors to consider the light of fire, to talk to them about maybe if they would do matching
Yes,
up to a certain point.
yes, we
So-
present that opportunity with each and every prospect meeting.
Okay, 'cause that can give a lot of people incentives. Thank you.
So the final slide is just a thank you. I know Benito stated some specifics at the beginning, but I really wanted to go through and recognize each of these bullets because there truly have been countless hours of meetings with various city staffers for the UIP project as a whole, hours of discussion and planning with the Fire Marshal Doug DeHaven and Fire Chief Steve Lohr, planning and guidance with city engineers, planning and coding staff, specifically Rodney Tissue, but there have been others. Direction and approval from HDC and zoning committees and staff, specifically Steve Bachmiller and Kathy Marr. Obviously, Valerie's service on the Maryland Theater Board, and additional supervision and guidance from city financial staff, Michelle and Jason, and definitely your support and advocacy as elected officials. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
is there, I want to make sure that I'm reading this right.
Sure.
Is there any specific reason that you only came in for part of that request today? Is it simply because
At the,
that's a known cost right now?
Instead of wanting the rest of it.
I'm trying to avoid you having to come back in a second time.
There's
We're not-
140,000 there, right?
And you're asking for 70 of
Instead
it.
of
So-
saying you want the whole
So what would
100.
the
oh, the
remaining
county's
70?
paying the other 70.
No, no,
I
no.
got
I
that.
think Kristen is saying.
If I do the math, the total's 280, of which about half is gonna be needed for
No,
construction.
no, we're not gonna use the full 1 million.
No, no.
I got you. We're at
We
seven
wanna
twenty
give you the rest of the
for
money.
design, right? That's what I'm trying to figure out how to do.
Yeah, sit back, will you, Jessica?
We say
140 for construction administration. So at some point, you may come back in and say, hey,
We already
there's
are.
still 70 out there. Can we use 70 for something else? And all I'm
Like
saying is,
construction.
I don't want you to have to come back in for the other 70.
Right.
We
I think
hope that
could-
you approve a much larger
I think you could-
gift to the construction
Well, we
Yeah.
understand
contract.
that, we understand that, but.
Yeah,
but there's
I got
also-
you there.
There's also 500,000 that we've sort of decided that we're not gonna have. So, I mean, and that's when you get into things like, you know, you could easily say right now, the city's willing to match up to $70,000 of donations, because you already will have that in hand right now to be able to go to somebody with. That's the point.
No,
So,
that's
you know, I know you're asking for more than 70,000 in construction cost.
Well,
Yeah,
the-
But right now, there's 70 grand there that you won't have to come back and ask for. I think you'd get approval to throw that in right now.
Right. Well, I would say the first step is when we went through this whole process, we were really diligent about watching our expenses. We wanted to deliver on time and under budget, so the savings were thoughtful to come to the city and say, we've been able to accomplish that. If we received the full funding, the rest of it, we'd definitely apply it in a very direct way. What's needed to the project itself, and if we had extra, we would definitely maybe work with you on how we would do it for matching. But it would be used we would inform you what that would be for.
And Mr. Mayor, I don't mind committing that to the theater and letting them come back to us and just let us know what it's gonna be used for.
I figured that was 500,000, that was,
That's what I think we all
yeah.
figured.
That would be, we were just being
That
mindful.
would be
of
We
wonderful.
understand, we totally,
we're s-
totally understand.
No, that's perfect.
We appreciate it.
Well,
We like working.
Well, can I ask a question now? On the 2.5 million remaining, the gap, has the county said that they would help?
We have a request into them. I think their last response to us is they wanted to see how the Board of Ed project bids came in, how our project bids came in.
Right.
We have
I
a
understand
similar
they're
There's a lot of
forward
work
funding
in
the 5
progress
million, but they're gonna get that
Yes.
money back.
yeah.
so.
Yes.
There's a lot of other activities that they're watching to see where they come, the bid process is going out for that project itself, to see where that comes in as well.
Okay.
This project has to go on.
Yeah, well,
But
we're-
yes, we've definitely made the same request.
Okay.
to them.
All right.
Right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you
for
very much,
everything.
Jeff. And let me ask a question, because I'm feel a little nostalgic here. Lou, you can help me answer this, I'm sure. The big staircase in the front on this picture, the original Maryland Theater had that, correct?
This.
Yeah,
Oh, in the
inside.
grand lobby?
Yeah. Because unless I want to just remember it that way, I don't know, but
No,
Really?
the photos I've seen are a long, narrow, very ornate hallway that went the
Low
length of the
ceiling.
courtyard. Yeah, very low ceiling, and led you into the
yeah.
orchestra level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Okay,
we're
all right.
generally excited about the stairwell, because that's going to be it'll be a very
Oh,
beautiful
it's-
presence.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, it's-
Yeah, and that's how we thought of, we
Well,
don't
I'm
want
going
to.
to remember it my way, all right?
Yeah.
And I have to say that for this project to be done, it has to be done right, and you all are doing it right. And we all sort of thank the Lord that nobody got hurt when the plaster fell, because it seems to me that was the beginning of this whole
You're right.
thing.
Yeah.
You're right.
And thank you, the Hamiltons.
Yes, definitely.
As a community, we've been through a lot to be patient to get here. Now we're here. It's nice that as a community, we're working together, and we really do see this come to completion, working like we are together and being open. in
One of
everything.
your rooms, if I'm not mistaken, will be large, one of your rooms in the new addition will be large enough to be a sort of conference area,
Absolutely.
correct?
Yes, we have an event center on the top floor, seating.
Because I think
So,
about that, and I think about our urban partners plan.
Yes.
And that is one of the points, one of the 8 points, and I mean, I see this working in conjunction with that, and maybe this is that instead of trying to create another conference center.
Our hope is definitely to become some type of conference center. And actually, funny you say that, Audrey from the CVB is
That's
here.
why, yeah.
She's recently joined our board after many discussions
It's a
along this
partnership.
same topic to become that hub for the downtown
Sure.
area. And we actually have a tour, Thursday, with a conference for 2021. We hosted a conference last spring, and there's been some other discussions, some really unique ideas about conference and event hosting at the theater using the cultural arts trail, and so really showing off our downtown.
And while the project design has been going on and construction decisions, we've actually been working on the business modeling out to 2020, 21. Because we really do, and that's why CVB joining us as a partnership.
Sure.
We really do want to bring people downtown
Yep.
and have large events downtown, so we're excited about that.
But as far as the numbers, that top floor event space, and Doug DeHaven isn't here, but there's been
You got a
some.
budget numbers?
Yeah, the capacity numbers, yeah, based on seated people, but it ranges from 300 to 400, depending on how you set it up.
Cool.
We also have a conference room for up to 25, cocktail lounge up to 90, rehearsal studio that could be a smaller breakout session for 110. And there's some, the grand lobby could be set up as well.
Sure.
And obviously the theater for the largest meeting of
Right.
all.
And we see partnerships with the restaurants and local businesses to be part of that support system to the events. So,
Exciting.
yeah, very much so.
Exciting project.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up is discussion on permitting, inspections, code compliance review. I lovingly call the picker committee, Kathy, and code administration.
Good afternoon. So we are back again to continue discussions that were a couple of weeks ago. We're supposed to pick up on the first plumbing slide.
Okay, I guess we'll start back up where we left off. The discussion that we left off with was that the staff would support waiving the permit requirement when you're replacing one fixture within a year, rather than just replacing any of these types of fixtures throughout the course of the year at a property. Because the one thing you have to consider is not only the replacement of these fixtures do require a permit by code, but also you gotta think of the grander scale rather than just thinking of a single-family home. When you're thinking a single-family home, like we were talking about, we're saying, oh, replacing a toilet and then a month later replacing the sink. But let's think about a 6-unit apartment building where a property owner wants to go in and change all the toilets and sinks in a 6-unit apartment building. So now we're talking about 12 fixtures being replaced rather than just one unit. So that's what we need to consider here, looking at the larger scale of things. When we're thinking of waiving requirements for permits, we need to think of all the types of buildings that we have in town, not just single-family homes. The next slide goes in that we would recommend against waiving the permit requirement for water heaters, no matter the fuel source or power source, gas, electric, et cetera. This is consistent with other local jurisdictions. However, to read a compromise on this, we would support waiving the application fee for these types of permits. For residential, that'd be a $50 savings, and for commercial projects, that'd be a $100 savings. Essentially, it would be $35 for a permit for this type of replacement of a water heater, and that's for one water heater. If you're replacing multiple water heaters at a property, you're going to pay the application fee. This is only for replacing of one water heater.
At least, that's what we're proposing.
Correct. Just to go along with that, just show you some examples of just some inspections that we've gone on that water heaters have been replaced without permits, and we've seen, faulty, wiring done incorrectly, things not supported. These are just pictures that we had stuff of. We've seen other types of installations that have been incorrect as well, that people are just going in and replacing their own water heaters without proper permits and inspections. As far as a mechanical permit goes, staff would recommend against waiving any permit requirements for replacement of any existing furnaces, heat pumps, HVAC equipment, et cetera. This is consistent with Washington County. They require permits for this type of work as well. As far as electrical, currently already exempt for permits is the replacement of light fixture for a light fixture, replacement of a light switch for a switch, replacement of exhaust fan for an exhaust fan, replacement of a ceiling fan for a ceiling fan. So those things are already currently exempt from any type of permit requirements. We recommend against exempting permits for a ceiling light to a ceiling fan. There are attachment issues, the heights of the fan blades from the floor, proximity smoke alarms. We've seen this common. That Washington County and Frederick County both do require permits for this type of work. Frederick County only requires a permit if they're changing the wiring. And just some pictures of.
Why does Frederick only require it if you're changing the wiring? Did you ask?
I did not make that call. Do you know offhand, Blaine? No, I mean, our electrical inspector talked to their electrical inspectors for those requirements. I do not know the details for that one. As far as some other items that were talked about with electrical, we would recommend against exempting permits for the replacement of electrical outlets. Basically, the state code requires that new outlets and replacement outlets be arc fault protected, and we would recommend that this should be done by a licensed electrician. This should not be something done by a maintenance man or a homeowner. Staff would also recommend that a replacement of a regular outlet to a GFCI outlet be permitted and inspected to verify the correct circuit protection is in place to prevent electrical shock. Currently exempt from permit replacement of a grounded outlet in a bathroom to a GFI, or replacement of an existing ground fault outlet in a bathroom or an uninhabitable area to outdoors. Again, this is consistent with Washington County and Frederick County, and City of Frederick has it where they're changing the wiring. So that was, when we asked them, that was their same answer for that one.
I guess that's my question as well, is in those instances where you say currently exempt from permit, going from grounded to GFCI, or existing GFCI and bathroom or uninhabitable area outdoors, your assumption is they're already gonna have them, right? In that second bullet point.
Blaine is a master electrician. I might let him kind of answer that more specifically.
I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat. You were looking
Sure.
away and I
So
didn't hear.
the second bullet point seems to make the assumption that those particular areas would already have a GFCI outlet in there.
Replacing one that already exists.
So I guess, and that, I think, in my opinion, or my mind, is why Frederick City may have it listed that way, because, in other words, if it's already grounded, it's already grounded. It doesn't really matter whether it's in a bathroom or a living room or a kitchen or, some area not described in bullet point 2.
I can't answer for the city of Frederick.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out why we specify those 3 areas already exempt in ours, and the only logical reason I can come up with is because the assumption is that's what's already there.
And, I mean, what if it's replacing a light kind now? What if we're replacing the GFI? I mean, what if you?
Replacing existing
Yeah,
GFI with
yeah.
existing, that's already exempt from permit, doesn't
Okay,
require a
okay.
permit.
Only in,
All over or only in those areas you're talking about?
Bathroom and habitat areas and outdoors, because essentially that's where they're required at now.
Okay. So if I had one in the kitchen, and I replaced it, that'd be in violation without
You'd
it.
have to get a permit for that.
No, if you already had an existing one in the kitchen and then replaced it with a new one, that would not require a permit for that.
Okay.
so, I gotta tell you, that confuses me a little when I'm reading the second part that says that the replacement of a regular outlet to a GFCI outlet be permitted. It almost seems to say that that's the requirement that has to happen, but it's exempt in those areas that you're assuming that it's already same to same. I guess that's how I read that.
What we're being confused about is it implies that that you're gonna go replace a GFCI with a GFCI. According to that, it's only exempted if it's in a bathroom, or an uninhabitable area, or outdoors, according to those
By the
bullets.
wording that you, yeah.
And we're trying to figure out why it wouldn't need a permit, as the question was just asked, to go from GFCI in a kitchen to GFCI. And we're assuming that you don't need a permit for that, but that certainly isn't what that implies up there.
Right, if it was already ground fault protected in the kitchen and you want to replace that outlet, with a ground fault, it would not require a permit.
Okay, so we need to take out those things that say in a bathroom, the qualifiers, that seem to limit it to bathrooms, uninhabitable areas, or outdoors.
It's like for like is okay.
Right.
Regardless of where it is.
Which is sort of what City of Frederick's saying.
So you're
Like
not
for like.
Once the
changing-
wiring
okay.
is changed, right.
You're not moving wiring, you're just
Right.
changing the outlet out.
Which I understand in the instance you got some house from like, 1903 and,
Oh, you got a house like mine.
you got the old knob and tube sort of wiring still in the wall and it gets that jump versus a house built in 2004, you know what I mean, when all the regulations have
Right.
assumed everything's already, or is built to a grounded standard. There's a significant difference there of assuming or not assuming that like to like is actually occurring. I mean, that's how I see it.
And I also see that the vast majority of house fires that I'm aware of, at least in the area that I live in, which is a development that was built in the late 40s, are all electrical in nature. And so when we're dealing with changing from old to new, I think you need electricians.
Which I have the same opinion on the light.
Paul says, okay, and then,
We all say the same
we need to
thing?
spell it out a little bit clearer.
But,
Like for like is.
But I think Frederick City says it as simply as that is. And
Yeah,
I think it
City
says
of
it that way
Frederick
for
requires
the fan
only a
and light
permit
as
if
well.
wiring is changed,
I mean,
yeah.
a ceiling light transitioned out to a ceiling slash,
Fan.
light with fan is significantly different if the wiring isn't like to like.
There's
Just
also an
my,
issue if it's
just
put
my
too
opinion
close.
is I think we need ours to read
Well,
the
that's,
same as Frederick City's reads.
well, that's the
On
thing.
those 2 points.
City of Frederick, Washington County, and Frederick County do not have it delineated down to that level of what is like for like and this outlet for this outlet type of a thing. That is when you call their office and ask them and talk to their staff, that is the answer that you get. No one delineates it down to that level. It's up to the staff to make those determination of what requires a permit. We're looking to go to that further level.
All I'm saying is, for those 2 specific items, for me in particular, I would prefer to move to the Frederick City language for both of those items.
That's what I'm saying. There is no language in their code that specifically says that. That is a interpretation
So it
by the
depends on who you get
staff.
on the phone that day?
Correct.
And
Well,
with
we
the
want to
ceiling
be different
fan,
than that.
Frederick City has to have some language to that affects somewhere in their code.
but with ceiling fans, it's not just the wiring, there has to be a separation from the smoke alarm, the ceiling height issue.
I hear that. What I'm saying is, if Frederick City gave that response, I can't sit here and believe that they don't have something written in their code that would lead you to put on this slide that it is different than Washington and Frederick counties. And if they are more flexible, I'm interested in going to the Frederick City language, depending upon what it specifically says.
We can provide you with that language, but I can tell you it's not different from our language. It's an interpretation.
So they're keeping it high level instead of being picky? Is that, I mean, if there's not specific criteria, that means they're just keeping it very broad?
Very general.
Like the mayor had mentioned, I
Depends
think
when
it
you get
depends
on
when
the
you get on the
phone.
phone that day.
Well, I'm not really interested in being like Frederick. I want to be easy to do business with, and I want people to look at Hagerstown as an example, not as that we're looking at Frederick, we want to be like, I don't care about Frederick personally.
But the argument that we hear fairly often is you're harder to do business with than outside of the city limits in this county. You're harder to do business with than the apartment redevelopments I do in the Frederick area. That's a common theme we hear, and all I'm saying is if there are folks out there in that realm that just me, that think that I'm going to go for something that is dynamically more flexible or more easy than those jurisdictions, I'm not there. I'm at the point where I'm willing to compromise and be consistent with those areas that those folks are saying we're harder than those to do business with.
And like I suggested the last time, I would talk to other jurisdictions, because when we called these jurisdictions, like when you call Washington County, they hear it's easier to do business with the city of Hagerstown than it is with Washington County. That's what the same developers and investment people say to them. Same thing when you talk to the city of Frederick and Frederick County, they say that against each other. I think it's a common red herring, essentially, that people always lead people down that path of saying it's easier to do business with someone else than it is to do with you all, make things easier for me. That's a very common discussion within the code community when you talk to other jurisdictions and their departments. That's a very common theme.
Then we need to be the best, then.
I
We
agree.
need to be the best
I
out of everywhere,
100%
so
agree.
that conversation stops happening. Because right now, we're gonna have to overcompensate to make up for that perception. And if it's hard to do business in Frederick, and it's hard to do business in Montgomery County, and it's hard to do business in Washington County, then great, come to Hagerstown and do it here, because we need it. So we need to be the best at it then, if that's the case.
And we
also need
do
to be
hear
safe.
those.
We also need to be safe, though.
Yeah, absolutely need to be safe.
I think we need to be consistent.
I think if your language, I think the clearer your language is, the less room for gray areas and interpretation on who answers a phone one day. I think it's better to get the language correct in whatever ordinance changes or anything that we make it very specific and very clear, so that there is not, you don't have these gray areas, you don't have.
What does state,
What we're talking
what does state
about-
code say about replacement of a light in the ceiling fan? Use that example.
The state code adopts the code just as it's written. They do not make any local amendments. And
I understand that, but
Yeah, and I
but what
can't
does state code say about that? If I have say I have a kitchen light, and I wanna put a fan where the kitchen light is and add a light kit, because I have a fan and a light now. What does state code say?
Yeah, it's specifically to the code, and I don't know it by heart. I don't know if Blaine does, but we would have to probably reference the code itself.
Right.
And for the most part, the electrical code doesn't have an administrative section to say what permits are required for local jurisdictions need to adopt that, which is what we did. We adopted language from the international code.
I think as clear and concise as we can be, there are health and safety issues that are gonna come up, and there's the off-the-wall things that we have to look at, and that's gonna require an inspector to really ferret that stuff out. But the general things like these, if we can delineate what we can and can't do, what a homeowner can and can't do, what a property owner can and can't do, as clearly and succinctly as possible, so there is no question, it'll decrease the workload for the inspectors, it'll decrease the hassle factor for the property owner, it'll make, basically, some of this stuff, you should be, the guy at the counter at Home Depot or Lowe's should be able to tell you, yeah, you need a permit for this, or you don't need a permit for this,
So,
I think.
so we're clear on this. We're only talking right now about basically replacement of existing stuff, right? And we're talking about generally home ownership. We're not talking about new construction, anything like that.
But we're also talking about rental properties.
Okay. I disagree with needing a permit for the fan. And I heard what you said, Kathy, and I read what this says about smoke detectors. And my answer to that is very simple. Do we need a permit and inspection to put a smoke detector up? You see, I got all these ceiling fans in my house, and I replace my smoke detectors at least every 5 years with the 10-year batteries. But nobody tells me I need to have the city come and inspect to make sure I'm not putting my smoke detector too close to my overhead fans. Meanwhile, the city provides a free service to come in and do that inspection by the fire department. If we're talking about rental registration, I'm assuming the reason we have rental registration is to have rental inspections. And if that does exist, then I think that's a different story. Now, do we still have requirements? Are we going to 10-year batteries, or are we required to have hardwired smoke detectors in rental units?
It all depends on the number of units in a structure.
Okay.
And new construction does so, correct?
In new construction, we've been requiring it for years, but the number of units deem the power source.
Okay. But that's my gut feelings about that. That's just me.
I mean, we can certainly get Chief Lore's opinion on that. I think he would probably want smoke detectors in relations to ceiling fans, probably.
There's no question, I have no doubt about it. In the same respect, we're talking about replacing, we're talking here about putting a fan in where a light is. I have no doubt that the chief would like that, and I have no doubt that's why the fire department covers the entire city of Hagerstown, offering free smoke detectors and free inspections. And I strongly encourage it. And I just think a lot of this stuff, for one, is happening. I mean, I'd like to know how many homeowners even understand when they go over to Lowe's that they need to come to the city to get a permit. And I'll bet you that 85% of them have no clue, and that they're changing their fans or putting fans in where they didn't exist without having a clue that they need to go to the city and get a permit, and doing it successfully. That's my gut feeling about it. I think it's happening, and it's happening substantially, and I don't know how you stop that.
Or if you need to.
Well, I don't think you need to. I mean,
Well, let me ask a question about the fan, and so, and how the state code applies. And when you read through the article here, the code that applies to it, it says, every fan, bottom of the fan has to be minimum of 6 foot 4 inches from finished level. I mean, that's from the state article here, and then it talks about testing of the electrical circuitry. So it does specify those things, but it doesn't specify and say, how your specific jurisdiction goes about making sure that that specification is met. So, I mean, you read it here, it says, well, it says, that specific testing of that circuitry to make sure it's grounded has to occur for a specific period of time within a specific parameter. But it doesn't say, you, City of Hagerstown, have to have an inspection staff, that is duly authorized to complete that process. And I think that speaks to staff's response that the state sort of specifies those things, and then the jurisdiction determines, how that specification process is met. And I'm just reading that one example here. It gives it all the parameters, which I'm sure are a structure of the parameters you then follow, whether it be for plumbing or electrical, et cetera, and those are the ones you follow, and then you basically craft them, to your local specifications. it reminds me of, when Hancock was gonna get rid of using the county inspection staff and was going to basically, hire that out third party. By no means am I suggesting that. What I'm using is that is simply as an example of that jurisdiction determining how it was going to be able to make sure it met those state criteria, if that makes sense. This is how we do it, and this is the degree to which we do it, to make sure that those parameters that the state has prescribed are then met.
Yeah, I concur with Kristen. I think D should be like Frederick, and E should be like Frederick, and I think A should be not limited to one per year. But that's me. That's what I think. I think that if you have 6 rental apartments and you have a tenant move out, and before you get your reinspection, you replace the toilet, you guys come in and inspect, you replace the toilet, that's just one per year, but then 3 months later, he has a guy downstairs move out, and he wants to replace that toilet, now he has to go get a permit. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean,
Yeah, it either requires a permit or it doesn't.
yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think that anyone who is being waived from doing something one time and apparently can do it correctly, it shouldn't have to be that you have to have a permit.
And I certainly don't want to just jump around too much here, but I agree with your prior 2 slides of staff's opinion, and I also agree that not to waive them. It's $4,500. You're not really saving much by waiving that, but I agree with you that the HVAC units and associated items, and also the water heater should have that inspection.
Yep.
So there are ones I do agree with and ones that I don't. I'm just trying to go through here. If you gave me a chart, I'd be able to sort of, check the boxes of yes and no.
Based on what we've heard so far, I think that what we'll need to do is, our direction's been coming up with a list of these items and then delineating them out.
And you're doing the right thing, you're doing what we asked you to do, so, yeah. And you're here presenting, and this is your recommendations, and now you're getting feedback from council that we must act on at some point in time to change these things, and these are what we're saying. So my suggestion would be simple. Under 6A, do you think that you can only replace shower head, toilet, dishwasher 1 per year? Or do you think it should be whatever's necessary that you're replacing in the period that you're replacing? Yeah, some feedback's good.
Yeah,
Are you asking us?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm going down so we can give these guys some direction.
I think if you can replace a shower head, you can replace 6 shower heads, you can replace 10 shower heads. Why, and to your example, if I was a good property owner, a good rental property.
I want to replace that
Every
stuff.
time somebody moves out, I'd want to redo their bathroom, for the next tenant.
Go ahead.
I think that brings up a good point. You said you would want to replace it, and you're saying if you're a good property owner, then you would be replacing it. But I think that goes back to the overall problem is, I think if we were easier to do business with and people weren't scared when they pulled a permit for this, that it was gonna end up in a laundry list of problems, that people will pull the permits. Like, I don't think that the fees, I mean, it's great to waive fees and make it even easier to do business. But like I said last time, I don't really think that's even the problem. I think people are scared to have an inspector come to their property for fear of they're gonna leave with 20 other things to do.
Well, let's
which is
finish my
creating
exercise.
an environment
Okay.
that makes people not wanna pull permits. But if we fix the environment, because that's a perception, whether it's reality or not, that's a perception, is that people just don't wanna have us in their buildings because it's gonna create a whole other laundry list of problems. And if that wasn't the case, I don't think anyone has a problem pulling permits. I mean, I know I'm not installing something in my house if I had a rental that someone else is living it without having a plumber do it, because my house would be flooded. I think most people feel that way.
So Austin's in on A. that you can replace as many as needed, just like Washington County, right? Washington County doesn't say one per year.
It just says.
There's one fixture.
Yeah,
And then
with
one-
no,
we already
with no
decided
time
on
limit.
1 through 5.
Okay.
So presumably
So
one by
Austin's
40.
okay with, you okay with that?
Yeah, are we coming back to 1 through 5?
We're doing it right now, we're going right down here. Yep, real fast.
I know we're on 6. I'm just
Six is
asking if
where
we're
the
coming
current
back.
starts.
Yeah, we were the whole way through 6.
Because I
We
think we'll
talked
need-
about 1 through 5.
We did in the previous meeting, and I think what we'll need from this one to come back for another
Clear
meeting is
direction
the
of
clear
1 through
direction.
5.
We got some direction through 1 through 5, we're getting clear direction 6 through whatever the memo goes through, and then we can come back and present
Right,
a clear
right.
direction on what we need to
Right.
do to
I
amend the
think
ordinance.
it's clear that we've been rather optimistic on time scheduling for this, so,
Yeah, well, let's get through the
No,
number
no, I agree.
6,
Absolutely.
okay?
Absolutely.
So Austin's okay with no time limit, no amount. Lou's okay with it. Shelley?
I'm okay with it.
Emily?
Yeah.
Krista? Okay, no time limit, no amount on number 6A. 6B, everybody agrees with?
I think you should have a permit for a water heater.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I'm
you
fine
should-
with
I
that.
think you
Yeah,
should
I
have a
understand there's
permit for
some
water
problems that can
heaters.
happen. I'm
I
fine
think you
with
should have
that.
a permit for water heaters.
C, heat pumps and stuff, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I think that should.
Definitely.
that's important stuff, right, permits, right. D, we want to be like, I hate to say it, like Frederick, right?
I think we understand, we want to be same to same, however.
Right,
we wanna word
right, same to same. And then E, the same.
City of Frederick.
City of Frederick.
Right, right.
Same to same.
Well,
If
there's a
wiring has
difference.
changed,
it.
right.
Same to same,
Wiring has changed.
yeah.
Okay. Look how easy that was. Let me move on to number 7.
Well, we've already talked about number 7 as well. That was the waiving the fee, the application fee for the water heater if you're replacing just one. So it's
Right.
that you had that emergency situation or whatever it may be, you want to upgrade that water heater, it's not functioning properly, it gives you that.
I have a question. This came from a resident. After our discussion, said, hey, I had a water heater, it went out on a Friday night. So they need to get somebody. How does then you get a contractor in for that emergency purpose on Saturday morning? I understand waiving the fee, but they're not getting a hold of you on Saturday morning. So they've got to get a plumber in there to either reinstall, change out, whatever. And then they come into you, Monday and say, hey, had this issue, come up. 'Cause I
Pay
think
the permit fee.
the question of the homeowner is, if I gotta go out on a holiday and, I can't get in to get a permit, can I still have the person come in and you wanna make sure that the contractor is protected from, that?
It's a very common thing for
Okay.
heat pump goes out in the middle of the night, they
I don't know
replace
that,
it,
so-
water heater does, they replace it, just come in the next business day for your permit, get your inspection. But it's
Okay.
very
Right.
common.
Yep.
All right.
And to Emily's point, I think that I would like to see, when all this is hashed out and brought back to us, is how do you plan to change the perception and the culture? What steps are you going to take in order to make the culture of doing business with the city of Hagerstown more friendly? Because no matter what staff thinks, no matter what, the perception of what we think is maybe different, because it's various homeowners, it's developers, it's, all across the board, it's people in, from out of state. So I would really like to see a plan as to how we can make it more business friendly.
Well, we've already implemented a lot of changes that occurred over the course of the year. Part of the issue is promoting what we've already done, promoting the fact that we put our staff through 6 months of training about being customer friendly and working with different
And that is right.
customers.
You're polite and courteous is definitely something that I've heard, but being helpful is probably what I'm referring to. Being more helpful.
I guess that's, sorry.
May I make a suggestion for thought processes? I'm incapable of evaluating staff for a lot of reasons. One reason it's not my job, it's Valerie's job. The only person I'm supposed to evaluate is Valerie. But it seems to me there's a whole lot of talk about perception. And I just say this to you, Emily, when you said whether it's perception or reality, we have to fix it. well, I have to say this, if it's perception and not reality, asking staff to fix something that.
It's like trying to find a unicorn.
Isn't true is very difficult, okay? Now, having said that, it seems one of the best ways to evaluate the situation is for feedback, which we don't get directly from our consumers. And it seems to
In
me.
a consistent, objective manner.
No, exactly.
We get it full
No,
well and
no,
very subjective.
I would very much
circumstances.
like to see, you know, I go to my doctor's office, and I can tell you, within 24 to 48 hours, I have an email asking me to fill out an evaluation form of what my experience was like at that doctor's office.
And we did put that into effect.
We have that in effect. After a permit is applied for, after a permit is
That's
issued,
great.
inspection is completed.
That's
you can
great.
do a
You know what
survey.
the only problem about that is? There's not one of us elected officials that have ever seen the results of those evaluations. So you guys are getting the feedback, and we're telling you what we're getting perception-wise. You're getting evaluations, and we aren't seeing them.
Who does the evaluations?
The
homeowner?
contractors, homeowners,
Yeah.
whoever pulls the permit.
So
it's-
I would
We invite
love
them
to
to
see
do
them.
the survey.
I think that would help us out immensely. I think it's a great idea that you're doing it. But I think it's even a better idea to share those results with us. And I would look to council and our city administrator to tell us. I'm assuming some of these things because citizens who are filling out forms with their names on them, this may be something that either needs to be done in executive session or redacted, so folks don't have anything publicly of their evaluations being made public with names.
It's all anonymous.
Okay.
It doesn't even track the IP address for the email submission. It's completely anonymous.
Okay. We offer them the ability to say who they are, though?
No.
We don't. I would suggest we do that also. Okay, but I would love to see the results of the evaluations.
I just want, I have to say this. I feel like I'm constantly harping on you guys, and
She is.
thank you. I know you guys do a good job, and you guys are very helpful with me. You've been very helpful through the Picker Committee. I know you did hours and hours and hours and hours of work, and you came prepared every week, and I appreciate that. And I feel bad at times. I feel like you probably want me to leave, but there's no way that so many people share the same story and there not be truth behind it. And it's a harsh reality to have to come to terms with. I have to do it at my own business. But when everyone shares the same story, when I get email surveys back at my business complaining about the same person, there's a problem. And when they're complaining about the same process, there has to be a problem. So I think it's easy to get defensive. I expect you guys to be defensive of your staff because you should be. And that's the sign of a good leader, and you want to defend the people that you manage and that the department that you work for. But I think we need to have very honest conversations about why this is still happening and why these stories are still happening all the time. And it's not just the people Kristen reaches out to. We know there are a few vocal people who you could give them $1,000 cash and that wouldn't be good enough. I understand those people are out there, but it's also the people I insure that have 3 houses that they rent and 4 houses, and not these big developers that have horror stories for days, but smaller people as well. And when so many people have the same story all the time, there's got to be some truth to it. We have to figure out a way to find out why that's coming and why these problems are still happening. Because we have to fix it. I mean, that's just the reality of it, is people think we're not easy to do business with. It's the same thing Governor Hogan faced with the state of Maryland, and they worked 3 years into fixing it and making Maryland open for business. And I just think this needs to be our main priority, because we have all this money coming into downtown, and we want to make sure that we're not chasing businesses away.
Or not allow, or they hear horror stories from developers and they don't want to come here. We don't want that, and I'm afraid that's happening. Actually, I know it's happening.
And in that event, if that's the path we choose, again, I think it needs to be objective. But equally importantly, I think it needs to be compartmentalized. Meaning, and I said this from the get-go with this picker and this effort, I don't want folks out there to confuse their objections to things like rental registration and the obligations of those types of programs with redevelopment efforts of properties within the city. Because I think that happens, that it sort of gets wrapped into a single ball of frustration that there are these, types of criteria that have to be met. And I think it speaks to things like .6, where we're willing to say, look, we're not gonna to ding you every time you want to change out your faucets anymore, okay? I agree that we can't pick apart, everything in the surroundings if you're going in to look for another, if you're going in there for a specific item. I think we definitely need to work on those things. But if the motions that we made a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to become more aggressive about the significant number of apartments that we haven't inspected through the program, folks have to understand out there in that industry that that particular item is going to catch those things, you know what I mean? That there's this fear, there's this leniency out there over, and that's not going away. And so if folks feel like we're business unfriendly because we have rental registration, I'm just gonna tell you flat out as one council member, that for me is not only here to stay, but is critical to, I guess the proper management of these things we're talking about being more, I don't know, consistent, flexible, accommodating.
Helpful.
Yeah, I just don't want folks to wrap it all together and say, now I'm upset with the city because, I went through rental registration, you inspected 6 of my apartments, these 8 things were wrong. Well, that was a process of the rental registration, inspection, not a process of some permit. And if it leads then to permits that we're sitting here as a group saying we're requiring, then we can't absorb here and exemplify, or express that frustration as if it's by some means associated with this effort, because it's just not. And I'm sure that happens.
Okay, so are we done with this section?
I believe so. I mean, there was just a couple pictures. I mean, if you want to look at the pictures, but incorrect wiring, and then some arc outlets, and then the arc fault breaker requirement where a permit's required, which again, we'll have to delineate that item out, and it's just shown what, to do an arc fault breaker, you have to run the wiring all the way back to the panel, and this is how some panels look in town. So a
Right,
licensed
but we're-
electrician should probably be touching this type of stuff.
And we're requiring that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so it's just, that was just showing.
Yeah, we'll walk
pictures of
away
those
from
type of
that,
things.
yeah.
So,
And you're gonna come back and summarize where we're at with all of these points, right? To say,
Yes.
hey, city council, this is what you said.
Right.
Our best effort at that.
I feel like numbers 1 through 5 got
I think
lost
we're
in a lot of
pretty
conversation.
You take the
concise.
Bible
Okay, do you want to go, why don't we right now then go through 1 through 5?
Yeah, I know where you were with 5, I'm not sure where you were with 4, 1 through 4.
I think, yeah, let's get through it.
In fact, we just gonna motion that we were fine with 5.
At 5, you were fine.
Or they can come back and we can
being
do it,
like
we can
others
make,
not requiring the
do it later.
envelopes
correct, we were okay with not requiring MDE sign off for a permit moving
Yeah.
forward without that,
For demo.
for demolition. Okay, I guess number 4 was directing staff to allow field revisions to stand without architect input when the architectural plans required certain type features or locations of items.
I think the question there, what is the definition of a major dimensional difference?
Or minor dimensional, minor dimensional differences, and that's where,
Well, let me ask you a question. I'll give you an example, and you can help me then. I went to a business last year in July, in the dead of the summer. It was extremely hot and dirty. It was a Tuesday, and I was dressed like this, so I wasn't happy. But anyway, I go in, and an inspector came in to do an inspection to allow this business to begin hanging drywall, okay? The first portion of the building that he came in, he saw that instead of the studs running from floor to ceiling, because there were rafters that no one took into account, so they couldn't go higher than what it was. It was like 10 feet instead of, they could only go 10 feet instead of 14, okay? The inspector said, nope, that's not according to the drawings, and he left. Now, he didn't finish the rest of the inspection that he was there for. He stopped right there, didn't go another step further into any of the other areas, and left. Now, is that I mean, anybody with any sense could look and say, well, yeah, you can't go the whole way to the ceiling because there's rafters there. I mean, you can't put drywall from the floor to the ceiling because 10 feet up, you start with rafters and the other 4 feet aren't, you know. I mean, is that, how would you consider that?
There are requirements, and an architect is licensed by the state of Maryland to design things a specific way to meet code, and that's what they called out on their plan, was for it to meet code by that way. The architects visit the sites as well and do that evaluation. They design it that way for it to meet code.
So I think you can accomplish both, because one, I do not think inspectors should be architects. In other words, I don't think you should be making that decision on behalf of that individual that has certified their stamp on those plans. I think that gets the city in trouble. Number two, though, I do think you should finish the inspection process. I mean, it's easy enough to finish.
And that relates back to what Shelley said.
And create that punch list for the whole thing. Because, yeah, I think the helpful part there is, you know what, this is an issue you're going to have to go back to the architect on, and I'm going to go through and look at the 20 things I'm here to look at.
And we have addressed those items. I think Blaine can attest to that, that we've addressed those items, that we heard that last year, and that was already.
But you move a wall, you'd be okay with moving a wall an inch, suddenly the finished drywall puts the toilet at 14 inches away from wall to center instead of 15, and you said, yeah, that was good, then the architect comes back, and the other inspector comes back, the plumbing guy comes back and says, wait a second, you know, who approved this? And the architect says, I drew it at 15, and you said it was cool at 14. I just think that opens us up, and so, yeah, you can sit here and debate whether that inch was a minor or major issue, but you've made a material okay to material change that throws off, you know, having to go back and replumb and replace, you know, the drainage area for the toilet, or having to get a different fixture.
There are times too when we show up for an inspection where they just can't do the inspection because it's already been closed in. So that's in case where you've got the electrician out there or the plumbing inspector, and they've already sheet-rocked it in, so you can't see the work that they're there to inspect. That happens.
Well, you need to tell them to tear it out, right? I mean, I think we covered this like back in 1998 when a developer was building the same unit over and over and over and over again. And, you know, my question back then was, okay, if you go in and it's to do an inspection, but they've already covered it up or whatever, then you need to tell them to tear it down. I mean, pretty simple, you can't do an inspection if you can't see it. And that then falls on the developer. That's not the city's responsibility at that point. I mean, you're doing the job that you're supposed to do, and whatever they do in advance is on them. So. Okay, but thanks anyway for that. Go ahead.
I guess the next one was directing staff to issue a UNO permit if unpermitted work observed at a property. Like we said, we already pretty much do that. We issue temporary certificates of occupancy for projects if unpermitted work was identified. We don't hold up a certificate of occupancy. We've been doing that for years.
I think that speaks, though, to Emily's question of, you know, what do you determine was unpermitted work? I mean, somebody calls and says, hey, I'm you know, got this plumbing work, and you come in and say, well, looks like these other seven things.
Yeah, it can be confusing. This is a lot of times on new construction. So if we go and do an inspection, and we've already inspected most of the wiring and stuff, and then you go out there and they decided that they're going to run their security camera system after we were already there, and they ran new wiring for that. That's when you see unpermitted work that would be associated with use and occupancy.
Plus, as I said last time, these projects are not static. Between our visits, other things are going on. And we were like, well, last time I was here, those were old floor joists, now they're new floor joists.
How can you tell?
Plus, some of these properties we've been in a lot, and our staff are pretty familiar with them.
I guess the number two was directing inspectors to ignore code violations observed on permanent inspections.
This is what I was talking about, when they come in, when someone comes in and then they have other work to do. I mean, we hear that often.
And I think 2 and 3 are very different circumstances. I hear you saying you go into a project and things are going on and fixing up's going on, but I think to me that's very different than you're going in for a single item and you see something that you can't determine as part of that particular project was done in 1982, 2002, or 2012. That isn't associated with that, the components of that redevelopment or development related item that you're there, to look at.
Well, the wiring and the plumbing pipes and so forth have dates on them.
I get that. What I'm saying is if you're there and let's say you're there in the downstairs kitchen, and then you observe something, in
the hallway.
in a hallway or an upstairs bathroom,
How do you know my ceiling fan had a permit when it
I
comes?
just,
That's,
I just find, I guess for me, I would think that those things are either obvious or not.
Right.
Like for the example that I provided the council where we went out to do an inspection of the electrical panel and our staff discovered that the entire house had been rewired, the entire heating system had been replaced, and a new bathroom had been installed on the first floor that had not
When?
been there. And
Within a few months. I mean, it
That's
was,
different than if you can't tell if it was a few years
10
ago
years
or
ago.
20 years ago.
well, like we already have a policy in place that if it's older than a year, we just document it as unpermitted
Okay.
work.
But just tell us that. That's fine, just tell us that, and that's good.
Makes life a whole lot easier
Yeah,
for all of us.
that sounds great.
We
Yeah,
just
I think
document
we're
it
all
in the file
looking
that
for
it's
that.
unpermitted.
That sounds great.
That's exactly what we all wanted to hear. We haven't heard
Now
it.
you're gonna hear every time you go to a place, since you just said that, everybody's gonna say,
That's
I was here
okay.
ago. I was
And,
here
and,
ago.
and listen, I don't think that there, any of us, even if something that is old, that is clearly a true safety issue, and about the only thing that I can think of that really rises to that level, in my mind, probably is electrical in nature. I mean, when you're telling me you go into some place and see what is clearly shoddy and ineffective electrical work, you have an obligation to everybody to do something about that. It becomes a different theory maybe if you come in and, like I say, and see that a toilet had been replaced 8 months ago in a single-family residence, and you happen to know that there wasn't a permit for it, but everything looks okay. That gets into the police officers are gonna write the ticket for 3 miles and over the speed limit, and that's the discretion we would like you guys to use. But we're very happy to hear the year grandfather.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, true health and safety issues, though, definitely, that's something. You're inspecting electrical wiring in the basement, and you happen to notice the gas hot water heater has corrosion all over the vent pipe
Right.
because it hasn't been venting outside for a year and a half. That's a health and safety issue that we've gotta deal with at that point. But looking over and seeing a kitchen light that's,
Been turned into a fan that's too close to a smoke detector.
yeah.
Well, in that
Or it's a
case
new
though,
fixture.
I think in that case, somebody has to do something about getting the smoke detector in the right place. And, same as if there's not a smoke detector in the house.
I think the overall feedback that I receive regarding this point is that they feel like it becomes a gotcha situation. That they feel like they called for permit for whatever, and they feel like the inspectors are trying to find a reason to add to it. that's just what we hear all the time, that it's a gotcha mentality, and this goes back to
So it's not
the
with
customer
every
ser- absolutely not with
No.
every
But I
inspector,
think
no,
to go
but,
back to Lou's point, though, this after-action feedback on the process, that will do a lot to tell us, you know, is this hearsay, is this just, is it well-founded, or is it just, you know, is it just hearsay?
well, this goes back to a few weeks ago during council comments, I asked if I could send out a Survey Monkey, where, that the results came to mayor council. I thought it would be good to do one for staff, just to feel internally how staff is feeling, but I think it would be good to do to external as well, because I know was it Main Street that had done one? One of those had done one about 2 years ago, and the results were pretty negative the whole way around. So it'd be interesting if we could do that. Maybe that's something we could work on. But just speaking to that point, again, I never really think it's the issue. You have to be safe. The last thing I want to do is come across that I want you guys to just say, oh, that water heater's going to blow up, but I'm going to leave and not tell you because council's telling us to do that. That's not the case. It's just people say that there's this gotcha mentality where they feel like instead of the environment being helpful or more, you know, here's what we can do to improve this, here's what you're going to need going forward, it's a, ha, now I'm going to have to come back, or now someone else is going to have to come back. Like, that's just.
It's the delivery of it. Unfortunately, I've heard many of the same sentiments where it's almost an egotistical thing. And whether that's, you know, hearsay or true, you know, I think that it warrants a conversation, and, you know, how to fix that, I'm not really sure, but it's the delivery of, oh, you need another permit or something else.
What do those surveys come back to that you're sending it now? I mean,
Where do they come back?
to? Yeah.
They go to SurveyMonkey, like Councilmember Keller had mentioned there, that they go in system there. I'm the only one with the login and password essentially outside of Eric Hastings for that type of stuff, and Aaron Anderson, but then log in and look at them and see them. We've received approximately 75 to 80 back so far.
And I have no interest in viewing those in public session, just letting you know as one council.
I agree.
I think
Yeah,
it would be
what?
appropriate to.
I'm sorry?
I have no interest in viewing them in public
Well,
session.
me either, no. And here's the only reason why I asked that question, is because you sell a new Ford vehicle, the customer does a CSI form, okay, and sends it in to Ford. And you're ranked on that, all right? Now, you know, whether or not it's good or not, the salesperson has no idea. But Ford does, all right? And I guess and I'm saying this would never happen here, but, you know, if you get a bad survey through Monkey Survey, you know, how do we know if you got a bad survey if we're not forwarded the information to be able to see it? Or maybe it's taken out. And I'm not saying it would happen, but, I mean, you know, that's been known to happen, and, you know, when people sell new cars.
Well,
I
there
can
needs
tell you
to
there are
be.
good and bad ones that are on the survey.
The expectation is that management will deal with that employee. If that's a situation, management has to deal with it. That's my expectation of my department head and her expectation of her staff.
Absolutely, there needs to be employee accountability, because I'm sure the atmosphere is not good for your inspectors either. If you have one inspector who is constantly getting praise and doing a good job, and you hear that all the time, then you have another inspector who's constantly being criticized and giving feedback, it's gotta bring the other one down. I mean, that's just an environment, a work environment, so it needs to, like, each employee has to be held accountable for that, not just in your department, in any department.
You know, and the expectation is that employees are held accountable here, yes.
What brings the staff down is that when mayor and council hear complaints about our staff, they don't check with us to see what our side of the story might be and just assume that our inspectors are acting inappropriately. That brings our staff down.
Yes.
Well, I'm more than happy to send over what we get. Sometimes I just try to take it with a grain of salt and think, all right, we're trying to fix it.
I don't send over anything, I go straight to the horse's mouth.
But if there are complaints, I do want to hear about it. And I tell people that. And I invite, like when we were doing Picker and we didn't have anybody on Picker from the trades, I was inviting trades folks when they would talk to me about things. We realize you're not represented on Picker, but if you have other ideas, we'd love to hear it. And we did hear from one tradesperson, and it's a code amendment that we're looking to implement about the ground,
Site utility work.
to do it the way the county does it.
Do you
It's a
think
great
that-
idea. We didn't think about it. We'd like to hear other ideas like that.
Right.
Do you think that they're hesitant because for fear of retaliation?
That's what we keep hearing.
That's what I'm afraid of.
And I think that's why people reach out to us, because we can't control that. And I think that's why they're hesitant to reach out to you guys for fear of retaliation. It's their livelihood. And I know you guys better to know than you're gonna hold a grudge against someone in effect, but when it's your livelihood and that's how you make money, I mean, I would be nervous to complain as well. So I think that's why they reach out to us, because we're kind of the safe zone, and we can't make life harder on them.
I go back to Austin's, we just want to be the best. We want to be the best city to do business with. Simple as that. Whatever that means.
Whatever that means, right.
Whatever that means. Helpful, accommodating, without violation of the codes that we set in place.
Well, we
Let's
already
see.
feel we are the best in terms of the expertise of our staff.
We feel we are.
Without a doubt.
Because we're awesome, but we want everybody else to think that too. I want everybody else to think that.
And that's when you all receive feedback, we share it with our management staff so we can address any items that come up. We don't know. If we're not told, we don't know.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
All right, so where are we at here, so we can keep moving, please?
We're on number one.
Oh.
Well, number
Wow,
one
number
was,
one.
was the last item there, that issue building permit without associated trade permits. Like we said, this was adopted by Mayor and Council in 1998 to do this current process. We had reached out to other jurisdictions and came up with the conclusion that we were willing to waive the requirement for associated trade permits except for 3 different project types. I'm sorry, I don't know my heart, they're not all listed, maybe on the memo here. The installation of swimming pools was one, and solar panels, and something else, I apologize. It's on the slide and not in the memo.
I don't know which one of these slides it is.
Oh, here it is. Illuminated signs, swimming pools, and solar panels. We would still like to have the associated electrical trade permit still be applied for before issuing the building permit, since that work is so closely related with those building permit projects. Other projects, we're willing to waive those requirements, such as a remodel, and one of the things that we did here on Picker is that they will go into a project and potentially look at doing other work, not knowing what they want to get a building permit for what they want to do, but not knowing the other associated work they have to do. So it's waiving that requirement so that the building permit can be issued and then they get their trade permits later.
The whole idea of doing exploratory work on a building you've just acquired. You don't know what you've got until you look.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay. So that's it then, right? Good job. Move right in this neighborhood services code amendments.
Mr. Hayes needs to get that one up.
We did bring copies of this one.
I kept looking for the other one. Do you want this, Kathy?
Yes,
Is that yours?
I
That's
definitely
the
do.
next discussion.
I just took
I was
your,
like, what happened to
I
that?
think if we took that, then it'd be a really short presentation.
It would be.
don't take notes.
How much do I remember what I wrote 3 weeks ago?
You have to memorize.
All right, the next one up is the Neighborhood Services Code Amendments. We're before you to present some ideas for some code amendment remedies. We feel like there's some deficiencies that we have in the ordinances, like, for example, in the donation bins chapter and the rental licensing chapter, we don't have the capability in those chapters to lien unpaid license fees, as we do with the vacant structures program. So we can lien any fines. If we take people to court because they haven't paid their license fee, we can lien a fine if they refuse to pay the fine, but we don't have the ability to lien the fee, and that's just not fair to all the other people in the community who are paying their fees, that there could be some scofflaws, like, I'm just not gonna pay that. The ordinance isn't set up, all we can do is keep finding them and then lien the fines. In the vacant
Yeah,
structures program, though, we do,
That comes up to a real question that I think this incident on South Potomac Street raised for all of us, and that is the realization that it almost seems that if landlords decide they don't care, the only thing we can do is fine them.
Correct.
And I think we need to be able to shut them down.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I disagree with Kristen on this, although he'd probably agree with me. If the answer is that we have landlord, like the owner of that unit on Potomac Street, who not only had that unit, but has numerous other units in this town that are in total non-compliance and don't care, and our answer is we can fine them, and they're out of state, so they don't pay the fine, we can lien the property, which may mean nothing to them until sometime when they die. I think we need to have a process where we can actually cause them not to be allowed to own or operate a rental unit in the city until they come into compliance. That may require some legal work and this and that, but I was shocked to find out how many citations that unit had, and to find out how many other units this woman owns in this town that are apparently not registered or compliant.
So, and the blatant negligence that caused.
Yeah.
Or that, the blatant negligence that could have resulted in a much different outcome from that
Right.
specific incident. And I said in my email, I'm surprised that we don't have the ability to file criminal charges against that individual for that negligence, which could have caused, the loss of life. I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's the part that got me.
The finding, what I was keying in on was the finding that the basement apartments were
Yeah.
closed down for carbon monoxide and rendered, or judged to be uninhabitable. And then they just removed the sticker and leased it back out again.
Yeah, that's what I say, we.
And then by dumb luck, the incident with the fire, that particular apartment that they were doing so illegally just happened to not be occupied.
It wasn't dumb luck, it was by the work of the coach staff by finding out it was occupied.
But I
and
mean,
going
they
back
were
out
gonna
and making sure.
circumvent that process again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really think that we need to have staff work on on the nuclear option, whatever you wanna call it, that says, no, you cannot rent not only this unit, but any unit until you come into compliance and pay your registration fees. Wow, I think we were all amazed. And I think that's what we're really looking to see, is you see these, I think the more we can clean out these types of things, the easier life is gonna be for staff, and the easier life is gonna be for the good landlords we have out here, because you're not gonna have to compete with these people.
I think the other thing we need to look at, though, is not just shut down that person, but shut down the property, because if I'm a landlord and you tell me I can't rent in the city anymore, fine, 2 minutes later, I got an LLC and the property's
No,
transferred.
I agree with you.
So we
also.
shut down the property.
What we have in front of you tonight is not any revocation language.
Understood, understood.
But we have researched it, saw what other jurisdictions do in the state, and can certainly come back with some proposals that other jurisdictions do.
yeah, for the rental licensing, we were just gonna mainly following up on conversations that have already happened twice with the Mayor and Council.
Understood, and I also understand that this bullet point is not what I'm talking about. Your bullet point is collection of unpaid licensing fees, which is very different than gross, we don't care about anything. Licensing fees, compliance, or anything at all.
Well, we have a PowerPoint that we can run through that lays out the items that we're talking about. Basically, it's just to give you a heads up to begin, it's talking about being able to lien unpaid fees in a couple of different chapters of the city code, enforcement of overgrown vegetation on private properties in the public rights-of-way, and then the other is following up on conversation that was held most recently on August 15th on proposed rental licensing program code amendments. And so the PowerPoint starts with the liening of the fees issue.
Right, like Kathy mentioned, and we already kind of touched base on, is that the license fees themselves for for donation bins and rental facilities are not lienable. It needs to be in our code for it to be lienable. We put it in the vacant structure ordinances, it's just not in this license program. We do fine people for failure to register, but I will say that there are a couple properties in town that haven't paid for 8 years. Now, we find them several times, but they haven't paid their licenses for 8 years with our office. So these are just ways to make sure that they're getting the license fees leaned against their property.
And I think that speaks to, because I know what the immediate reaction will likely be from those entities that want to say that we're being heavy-handed and you know, and offending of the business practice. But I go back to, that was the same argument that was made for when we enacted the crime-free ordinance. And I think, you know, after a year of that legislation, I think a whopping 15 properties ended up actually sort of falling within the parameters of meeting that we've notified you 3 times and you've done nothing scenario. And so, you know, before folks, want to jump to the defense of saying, you know, you're hurting every landlord and every renter in this city, I think it's good to go back and look at those and do exactly what you just said, which is, you know the habitual offenders, those handful of properties that exist in this manner, in which you have no other course to move into compliance and thereby, creating this redress to do it.
Does our code provide for interest on unpaid licensing fees?
We have late fees. It's a $100 late fee. We administratively do it as $50 after 60 days past due, and then another $50 90 days past due.
And so it's a total of $150.
Oh, well, it would just be $100 total, 50 for the 60, 50 for the
$100
90.
maximum that someone could ever get on late fees.
Mhm.
And we do not file civil action against them?
For the late fees?
For the rental register, you have somebody 8 years in arrears. So we notify them, we fine them, they don't pay anything, do we sue them?
No.
Okay. I would suggest that if we're going to end up having a lien on homes, we are predicting we're not getting paid for a long time, right? Probably not until the home is turned over. I can tell you, if you sue somebody and you get a judgment against them, that judgment runs 10% interest per annum. So if you have someone who's 8 years in arrears and you get a judgment against somebody who we know has the ability to pay it because they have a rental property, you then have a judgment that's carrying 10% per annum interest per year if they want to sit there on that house and wait till it gets sold. And I think you also will find with some people, having judgments against them is not something that they find very pleasant in the credit business, if they are business folk. I don't know how much of that, is practical or not, but it's a thought process. And you may not even have to do it that way. You may just have to amend the code and say after the late fees, after the first year of non-payment, it collects interest at 10% per annum. Same way it would if it was a post-judgment. And that doesn't require filing any suit. But again, I'm anticipating with the talk that we would anticipate that we're not going to recoup these fees for years because we're waiting for the sale of the property.
Unless the ordinance is changed to say that if you're not paying your fees, at a certain point, your license is revoked. And if the ordinance also says, and that means you can't rent the property, that would have an impact.
That may solve the problem.
And you're attaching it to the lien,
Yeah.
which means the county says, hey, you got any? And you say, yeah, here's the ones I got, right?
And if you keep
then I've found, in
occupying,
my experience, you get that back.
and if you revoke the license and the code says you cannot occupy it at that point, then, and if they occupy it, then you take them to court because they are occupying an unlicensed unit. That's not how the system works currently, so that would require a change.
And I think we would probably like to, again, and maybe an executive session, hear about some of these properties and property owners that aren't paying. I'm curious to know who they are and what these properties are like. Are they just not paying, but everything else is copacetic with them? Or is it what I would expect, that the people who aren't paying also aren't doing anything.
Not reporting their tenant turnovers.
And so we're not having inspections, and so we have these landlords out here that are just making our good landlords look like they're fools.
Yeah, I think this is, going back to some of the things we've been hearing from people, from what I'll call the good property owners, I think they would applaud something like this, because it's basically, it's validating what they're doing right.
Think about it for a second. What's our registration fee a year?
$75 per unit.
$75 per unit. So what's cheaper for a slumlord? To pay $75 a unit, or to pay the penalty and all that, and not do any work in their unit at all? There's, they just, I'm wondering why any of our landlords out there are participating in the program.
But can we reward for good behavior? Like, have a tiered program where if you don't have violations and you pay any fees on time and you're at a top tier and your inspections are less and then, and then if you're at a lower tier where you're not doing things according to what we expect, your rental registration fee is higher, your inspections are more often, so we can reward for the positive behavior for our good landlords that are doing the right thing and
I think we can talk about the tier maybe in a later slide.
Okay.
I think it's a
talk
positive
little bit
idea.
about that.
But yeah, I mean, I hear this and I'm serious. Why would a landlord want to register with us?
Right.
For $75 a year, then the only thing they get charged is a late fee and have to be subjected to inspections and citations and everything else. It seems to me if your place needs $1,000 worth of work and you know it,
Pay the $100 fine.
I'll pay the fine.
A suggestion that I got was if someone, for the $75 fee, if someone doesn't pay it after, say, 2 years, we double it every year. Reason being, when they go to sell the property, any good real estate agent is gonna ask for a profit and loss sheet, and they're gonna see the licensing fee is $500 or whatever it is at that point, which is going to trigger the fact that it hasn't been inspected.
Yeah,
And
but
rather,
that doesn't solve our problem, because what staff is telling us is that the people who aren't paying licensing fees, their place is trash.
right.
And the
But
whole
then they-
idea of our rental registration is not to allow landlords to rent pieces of trash to people. And what we all know is generally, they're very competitively priced with good landlords. And they aren't spending the money to keep their units up to speed. So just leaning a property or charging money to people who don't care doesn't solve the problem that that's my neighbor who's running down my property values because they aren't in compliance and don't care at all about keeping their property up.
And I agree with that. What's happening in some circumstances is they're being sold to people who are buying them that aren't aware of the problems that they're getting into. They were just trying to solve like a way to see, this unit hasn't been inspected. Now, most real estate agents around here are gonna know to call the city and ask if it's been inspected. But it was just a suggestion they had, so when they're selling a unit, the person who's buying it is aware that the unit is going to have to go into a rental registration program, and they may be inheriting the problems that the person before them failed to fix for years and years by just not having you guys come in there. So maybe we could, as the city of Hagerstown, include a pamphlet that needs signed at closing stating that if you're using this house as a rental, it's going to be subject to the rental registration program, just some way to make people aware, because if they're coming from out of town and they're buying properties here to rent, so they may not be aware of the rental registration program. If we have that house you just talked about that hasn't been, hasn't paid in 8 years, I assume hasn't been inspected in 8 years. Imagine if they sold it to somebody from Montgomery County who had no idea, and then they come in and you guys say, you gotta fix this, and this, that's a bad experience.
The disclosure statement, Kathy and Blaine and I met with the one realtor group, and I forget which one it was, Penmar Realtor Group, and talked to them about that idea of a whole disclosure statement was brought up, but it's one of those things that have to be accepted by the Real Estate Association to include with their closing documents. It's not something that we can just, I think, require through a municipality, but I guess Jen or Jason can answer that further.
And I think it's a good idea. I think that the only problem is that when you're signing mortgage documents, there's
So many.
mortgage documents, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't care at this point.
But they do have to
it's-
explain to you what it is.
Right, they do. And good
Listen.
settlement agents explain it very well, and other ones just whip right by.
Well, you're talking about
So,
settlement agents, but if you know, I put that monkey on a real estate agent's back.
I
I
agree.
mean, if you're a buyer and you got a real estate agent and you're buying a rental property, and, and you're not even asking any questions about it, and your real estate agent isn't saying anything to you, that's a problem.
But if the disclosure is signed and then the disclosure is sent to the city of Hagerstown and we see that it's done, you know, look, you knew, you signed it,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, I wish I had the kind of money I could just buy stuff and not look at what I'm signing, but there are people out there who probably genuinely
Well,
want to
they
know.
deserve to
listen,
get
they're-
ripped off.
Listen, I've had at least one,
I'm just gonna
I've
say.
had at least one half elderly lady come in to see me after she bought a property at tax sale. Cause she had no idea what liabilities were going along with that property, and suddenly, I had no idea. I don't want it. You know, I would just wanna get rid of it. And it's a shame, but, you know, in classic American and Anglo-Saxon law, there's a saying that says, buyer beware. You have an obligation, if you're spending that kind of money on real estate, to know what the devil you're doing. You just really
Enter
have
mortgage
to.
crisis, 2008. Where,
And don't
People
buy
didn't
sight
read.
unseen.
right,
I mean, and listen,
it's a-
I've learned an awful lot from being on city council. If I were a buyer of property now, I would know a lot of things that I
taking
didn't
a
know.
3-hour settlement.
So the properties that we know about that are the habitual offenders and the ones that have decades of fees unpaid and everything else, to your example, the buyer from out of state or whatever, how do they find out about that? Is there something can we publish on a website? These are problem properties. I mean, can you shame a
I like
landlord?
that idea.
Can we just be very static, though? These are properties with outstanding fines?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that accentuates it, it's a problem or not a problem. It just
This-
says,
it's a-
if you're looking
Sort of
for,
like
if you're
seeing the
looking
tax
for a
sales in
list.
the newspaper.
If you're looking,
Right.
yeah, if you're looking for
Right.
properties with outstanding fines, the city of Hagerstown,
it's on the
here's a list.
City of
Health-
Hagerstown.
the health
If you're interested in
department,
buying one of them, it might be on the list, it's on the list. I
It's
don't
on
health
the
department
website.
report in the newspaper.
I don't think it
Right.
says whether it's a good property or a bad property.
Still got
It just says
outstanding
that
fines.
it has an outstanding, I mean, it's so different than when somebody calls me at work and they'll say, hey, I'd like to speak to somebody at the town, going to settlement, June 30th. Are there any outstanding? And I get those calls, on a fairly common basis, and they say, are there any outstanding utility bills, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, if we were a larger jurisdiction and we had a significantly larger number of those, then I think that some type of virtually accessible, list of that nature is fair. Because I don't think it does speak to, if somebody has an $800 outstanding water and sewer bill, it really doesn't say whether or not that property is in good or bad condition, or whether that property owner that left that bill was a good or bad person. It just says, here's an outstanding amount on this particular property.
A list is something we can certainly look into. Previous councils, that's not been something that we've wanted to do, but it's something that we can certainly look into. I mean, as far as the outstanding notices, licenses and everything, you can look them up currently online, just the same as paying a water bill, same
Right.
location, and find everything out about the property as far as what our office has done as far as inspections or licenses.
So if you're just as easily able to look up if there's an outstanding lien against the property as it applies to a fine or utility payment. I mean, heck, we just had staff from Water and Sewer Department and Electric Utility Department in here, saying, we're gonna have to shut off, 75 accounts a day for 3 weeks. That to me, isn't any different of a type of list than this would be. It doesn't speak to the quality of the property owner or the property itself, just that allows that individual to have that awareness.
Certainly something we can do.
How does the council feel about this proposal that we be able to lean the
I think it's
license
a great
fees?
idea.
Yeah.
I think it's a great
Donation
idea.
limits and rental license.
And I think
facilities.
your definitions in 185.3 on the next thing is an excellent idea.
One of the common calls that we'll receive is let's say vine overgrowth or weeds into brush or trees growing into an alley or a sidewalk, hindering the walking path or hindering cars travel down through those areas, and also like leaves on a sidewalk creating a slippery surface. We get a lot of those calls during the fall time period. But the code is silent on those types of issues. A lot of times we do get those items addressed, but they are silent on these issues. So it's basically just defining these items as I believe Kathy delineated in the memo of what specifically how to address them, so that it's in that 185 chapter, so that when we get these types of calls, we're not taking an extreme amount of time. If someone calls our office right now and says that there's a tree growing into the alley and my car keeps on hitting it, we don't have anything to specifically address it. We can issue a notice and tell them to do it. Our code section allows us to do that. But as far as getting the authority to trim the tree, to get it out of the alley, takes a court order, and that takes us 3 to 4 months to get into a court. So by that time period, that citizen is very frustrated with us and everyone else that travels that alley.
But if it's included in this chapter of the city code, then we can, after proper notice to them, we can take care of it.
In 10 days, rather than allowing it going
Right.
for months.
That's commonplace, I'm just surprised we don't
Yeah.
It was just
have
one
and
of those
execute
things.
that. I mean, that's what we do all the time.
Mhm. It's not in our
Seems like you kind
ordinance.
of have to do that.
It's in a different chapter of the city code that has a different process. This chapter is the one where it's basically the weeds and debris ordinance. City gives the person notice, and then if they don't take care of it, we take care of it.
I don't see a section in here under 185-3 that refers to, like, weeds in the street between the street and the curb.
It already addresses that item.
It becomes even clearer with this change to number 1, or within the public rights of way.
Right.
That would be the
Talking
weeds.
about weeds in the street, between the street and the curb.
Oh, well, that, by definition, I believe, is the city's responsibility.
Right, exactly. Now, I know we have 2 new street sweepers coming. And I always hear that, the reason why we don't go around and clean those weeds up is because the street sweeper actually is supposed to take them up as they go by. So what I'm getting at here is real simple. Police your own first, and then you can police everybody else. If we aren't doing it, if we aren't policing our own, in the properties that we own, and the things that we control, such are the streets and the curbs, because the curbs are, between the street and the curb is ours, then we shouldn't be actually doing anything to anybody else until we are making sure we're doing it right ourselves.
I think I need you to be a little bit more specific on that one based on this ordinance, because this is saying also that if you have 3-foot-high weeds on a property, if their curb line and between the curb and the street has weeds in it, that we cannot mow their lawn? Because they have 3-foot-high weeds, because we have not taken care of our weeds between the curb and the street?
We aren't addressing ours. How can we address somebody else's?
You have a lot of
Well,
citizen outcry on that one.
I think, Mayor, the answer to that is that if my neighbor's got 3-foot weeds in their yard and some weeds sticking up out of the street, that I'd like the city to come take care of the yard, thank you, not that. And I don't know why, when they're doing that, the guy with the weed whacker doesn't do the curb line at the same time. I mean, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me that they wouldn't take care of that.
I'm with you.
Well, but I think that falls back to every property is equally applicable. In other words, if this is meant to be a complaint-driven item, so somebody calls and says, hey, 917 Spruce Street, has got this particular item, should be as equally able to call the city and say, hey, whatever the address of Woodland Way, well, I guess that's a bad example, I didn't know,
Yeah, you're never gonna find any wheels between my curb and mine.
I mean the park. But the park isn't ours,
Went
that's
away
the
from
county's, right? I don't know, well, I'll give you a prime example, you know. I can equally show you in 3 spots on coming down Potomac Street, in front of, I believe, the property right there on the corner that has the bushes that sort of grow out, you know, and,
Charles Street and Potomac.
yes, where you know, nobody wants to be there where the road actually meets up and the cars are flying to sort of meet there, because they grow out, it's not safe, for, you know, especially for individuals, in wheelchairs, for passage. But then you go down to South Potomac here, and, you know, I guarantee you there's piles of leaves that have been in front of some of those places for 10 years, and they're just sort of a mixture of leaves and, you know.
Trash.
And trash. But then you can go in front of City Park, and what I'm saying is, the city shouldn't be any less, you know, culpable to be called on. I should be able to equally call and say, look, the leaves in front of the bushes, the hedgerow in front of City Park, you know, don't meet this specification. As a property owner, I'm calling on that particular property. And so you should be equally applicable to you know, to the law, for that particular item as you are. But I don't agree that the converse of that is you do all of those things and then those properties apply. I think it equally says every property applies all the time equally,
Whether it's city or private.
whether it's city or private. If somebody calls on any
Well, then we can all
property-
agree on that part.
Yeah.
But if somebody calls on some property, what I'm saying is the response shouldn't be, you know, well, you know, I don't have to do mine until you fix all of these. Because the reality is, nobody probably called on 90% of those ones that, you know, we should be as equally compliant on.
Just so you know, if someone has to call the city of Hagerstown and tell them that there are weeds that are growing up, and let's use the 400 block of North Locust Street, which is, every year, I go by there 1,000 times, and every year there's weeds that are this tall between the curb and the sidewalk that never come up when the street sweeper goes by. You know, I mean, we have personnel, right? I mean, they're out all over the city every day. Why should anybody ever have to call? Right? I mean, we see them. I see them. I know that everybody else who works for the city of Hagerstown sees them, who drives that same stretch of street.
Our inspectors actually have a lot of items to address items so that they don't have it, they have edgers and things of that nature. If we get a complaint on that, they generally go out and we'll just address it if it comes to our office and it sees it, just that item.
Okay.
It's a lot
I'm
quicker.
just saying, we shouldn't have to wait for a complaint, is all I'm saying.
It's just like when we see a TV at the curb, throw it in the back of the pickup truck rather than going through the whole drawn-out process. That could take quite some time.
When I went with the inspector, we picked up 3 televisions along,
Still
like within a 2, right? 3. Within like a 2-block radius.
Yeah.
Were they any good?
Pam may have kept, I don't know. I didn't keep it. Pam, I don't know what she did with it.
And they go to the transfer site.
In the mayor's instance,
We got 'em.
I'm just gonna say, by our experience in Myers, I use this as an example, you know, we heat seal those areas. In every instance, because that growth is below that surface and comes up every time. So we just burn it out and put the heat seal tar over it. And I don't know, I found that's the only way.
Okay, let's keep moving.
permanently fix it.
So,
I think my point was
185-3
taken.
definitions, though, the changes in red are, I'm in agreement with those.
Yeah. I'm in agreement.
Wait a minute, we're all in agreement with revision to inspection schedule number 2?
We have
Because
We haven't gotten that far, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, okay.
But the answer is yes, I am.
I thought we were just trying to rush through it. Get to the end, so.
We haven't gotten to it yet, but.
The next item on the list is the rental facilities program, the modification of the definition for a rental unit to include dormitory, homeless shelter, and residential treatment facility. This is something Councilmember Alshire has brought up in previous meetings, and we talked about, and when we gave an update in August, that we proposed a fee schedule for these types of facilities.
I'm in.
I'm going to be the unpopular one here. I think that we should register them and require inspections like this notes, but our homeless shelters are, at capacity. We have people walking around homeless all over the city, and now Reach is closed. They're not open all year because they don't have the funding to do it, and there are people sleeping in tent camps now. I feel like making it financially harder on them is a problem.
So you want a different type of fee specifically to those?
I don't mind them registering and having to be inspected and having to,
What about like the Wells House and
held
places
to a
like that?
standard.
They're already in the program.
Oh, they're already in we already inspect them.
This
Do we
was,
really?
I was talking about
I learned something new today.
homeless shelters. I just feel like making it financially harder on them and charging them a $100 fee plus $10 per bed, I believe that's what it says, is a problem. I mean, we have a huge homeless population here, like, you guys have to see it and have to read about it. And,
We have a homeless
yeah, and now, you know, the shelters that we do have are packed crowded all year with people, and I just feel like they're already struggling financially, and the last thing we want to do is cause them to close even earlier or offer less beds and then have more people on our streets.
But this would cover-
You gotta pick your battles, and that,
Like hotels and that are, no?
No, that's coming, that's a different topic.
Okay.
no, I wasn't
I
talking
don't
about
have a pro-
hotels,
I
I
don't
was,
have a problem with what Emily's saying about homeless shelters, bona fide homeless shelters.
yeah.
I
I just
agree
think
with
they
Emily.
struggle enough, and we don't need more people on our streets.
Yeah, I think
Here's the difficulty I have with that, and maybe it comes from being, you know, here for some time and seeing the what I'll call the evolution of a place like Reach, but, you know, obviously, you know, Reach at one time was a service provided, and it sort of moved around to, 28 different religious locations in the city area. And so then you have an entity that says, okay, you know, the whole moving every 2 weeks is not the best method. We're gonna acquire this property. We're going to take that property off the tax rolls, we're gonna fix it up. We're gonna make this a permanent location, and we're going to go from a largely temporary oriented facility to a more full-service oriented facility. And we're going to grow our service delivery from this specific type of service delivery to a more expanded type of service delivery. And we're gonna take on additional individuals to some degree in, you know, significant growth model. And, you know, we're going to go from a completely volunteer entity to a staff-paid, you know, type of certified, registered entity.
They're predominantly volunteer.
Well, but they definitely have evolved into you know, I'll call it a nonprofit business. I don't know what the right word is. So, you know, I hear what you're saying about, you know, the burden on this entity, but this entity has fairly exponentially grown, you know, over time, which clearly creates an impact within the city, you know, as that industry grows. And at what point do you make that cutoff?
$100 per facility, $100.
We,
No, at what
You-
point do you define what that type of entity is?
don't you think those entities have grown because the need has grown? I mean, no
I
one
don't know. I
decides to
guess you
sleep
could
in a tent
argue-
last night when it was 30
Could
degrees
argue a
outside just
chicken and
because
an
it
egg
felt
theory
like
with
it.
that.
I mean,
may
you know, I'm
suggest you-
hearkening back to an article, what was it, in 2010, maybe, where they interview a number of individuals, and, you know, a vast majority of the individuals, you know, drifted through the lines of communication, you know, into the community because of that service availability. So I hear what you're saying.
But Frederick has the same services available everywhere. There's always this perception that Hagerstown has this great majority of services that other places don't. Other places have the same services. We have a median income of $26,000. People are
say-
struggling.
Can I
Or a larger
suggest?
regional draw, I would
It's
say.
easy to do, we just have staff define what a homeless shelter is. I mean, you gotta define it.
Again, I have no problem with
Right.
them being inspected, being held to
No, I
a
understand.
standard.
We
I
just gotta-
absolutely
Gotta
think
come
that
up
should be
with
the
it.
case. People
Gotta
need to be
Come
safe.
up with an appropriate definition.
So
Financially.
what if
Are there
we
different homeless
register
shelters?
and inspect them and they find out that they aren't within the standards that we want, do we shut them down?
Well, they're gonna need to go to some sort of standard. I mean, I
wanna
understand
make
that, but you
sure. I
can't
don't wanna
expect
get
a
to the point
homeless
where
shelter to be held to the same standard as a single-family home. I mean, it's gonna be a different environment.
Just saying.
It's better than sleeping in a tent. I mean,
You know, when an individual jumps off a train at West Church Street and Burhan's Bridge and comes down the embankment and asks the police officer, is this Hagerstown and which way to the Reach Shelter? You know they aren't Washington County citizens that are homeless that are looking for someplace to stay. And that's what Reach became, just as Kristen pointed out.
I think that's a generalization that's doing an extreme disservice to a lot of people who don't have an
I'm
opportunity
telling you,
right now.
that's a real experience by a police officer.
I'm
It's
sure
not a
that happens.
generalization, that's a real experience about something that happened, and we get individuals here who are not Washington County residents who are looking for the services that we offer. And hey, listen, I had this conversation earlier today about the homelessness in Hagerstown and Washington County. Listen, I want to take care of people who are Washington County citizens. I truly do. But I don't want our services to be out there for people who travel from Pittsburgh, who come here from October to April.
I understand that, and it's also our job to create an environment where people don't need to be using those services.
If they're coming from Pittsburgh, they don't,
I agree.
never mind. Yeah.
So is the question here, do we want to treat homeless shelters as dormitories and make them subject to the same $100 and $10 per bed?
But you're saying that there's different types of homeless shelters? I mean, a homeless shelter is a homeless shelter to me.
We just have
I
one,
don't
we
know.
don't just have the one, that's all I was saying.
So to define homeless shelter, I just didn't know what that would mean. Like, what would separate one homeless shelter from another? Anything?
Well, like Reach is a seasonal shelter, the Salvation Army has a year-round shelter.
So do you,
St. John's
so
has
how
a
do you,
shelter.
so how do you treat Salvation Army right now?
Salvation Army depends, some of the units are registered with us, some of them are not, because their larger facility where their offices are located at, it's a bed facility that we do not license, but their individual single-family homes that they have are.
And you
And-
mentioned, oh, I'm sorry.
They're like up
Go
on
ahead.
West Franklin Street and places like that.
Correct.
And you mentioned St. John's. Is that a church?
That one, that's a shelter, but that one is in the program. It's
It is.
basically,
It's a 6-unit apartment building that a family can reside in, it's furnished
so it's
for
not,
them.
it's not like a room full of beds. But it's not permanent housing.
So all I'm saying is we define them consistently and that we inspect them consistently.
But a single-family home and a room full of houses are not the same.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm saying, fee aside at the moment, I'm just saying that if there's a majority here interested in a different cost association, then I would like to understand who that's being applied to. Because all I'm saying is there's more than one entity that's going to be applied to, and you're going to get the question from other entities to say, why am I not being treated the same? So all I'm saying is, whatever the majority say you don't want to apply a fee to, whatever that is, should be consistent and defensible. And beyond that, to your point of, inspection, I would only say that if there are those that want to define it and not charge it, I'm okay with that. But if there are those that want to not charge it and place a different level of inspection, applicability to it, I'm not okay with that, so.
May I make a suggestion? The easiest way to handle the fee is to charge everybody. The easiest way to deal with a place like Reach is to donate $100 to Reach every year. We donate money to, as we know, thousands of dollars to various organizations throughout the city, whether it be the municipal band or the library, so there's no reason we can't do that. Then you don't get into the problem of why them and not us. Because we could delineate, for example, there's a big difference, for example, between Reach and the Salvation Army as far as financial resources. So I think you'll find it a lot easier to make a blanket fee and then decide which organization we may desire to make a contribution equal to that amount, just like our discussion about Brooks House. You charge them the fee, but you make a donation in the same amount, and you solve the problem and you keep the consistency with the fee structure.
And still charge the $10 per bed?
That'd be a lot, but
I'm,
Say again?
that would be a lot.
I mean, there's a lot of beds at Reach.
yeah, I'm certainly open to discussion about
I'm
that.
saying whatever you work out, that when,
Be consistent, we got it.
when St. John comes in and Holly Place comes in and those other
Right.
entities come in, you have a defensible posture to say, you know, here's why we're doing what we're doing, and we're going to equally apply that, you know.
And Holly Place is a great example, because we give money to them every year. I mean, that's just a real good example of you increase it by $100. I could care less one way or the other about the $10 per bed, that's up to everybody else. Doesn't make any difference to me one way or the
That's
other.
an annual fee, $10.
Can we come back to that issue
Certainly can.
after the council has time to sleep on?
Sounds like a good idea.
Thank you.
We don't have to pay $10 for a bed to sleep tonight.
So now we're at number two.
The inspection frequency, the rooming houses, then if we go along with the dormitories, homeless shelters, and residential treatment facilities, that we inspect these facilities every 24 months, that it would be a consistent inspection. Right now, what we do is the rooming houses are once every 4 years. This would be decreasing this to once every 24 months. And then the rental units, exterior inspections would be every 36 months, which currently they're every year. And interior inspections would change from, or would go to every 36 months, and would be scheduled by the city. And this does not depend on the occupancy. Currently, the way interior inspections are done are at tenant turnovers and once every 4 years, but only at a tenant turnover. So if I inspect a property today, it's not due for an inspection until 4 years from this date, but only at the next vacancy. So if a person resides in the property for 10 years, we would not do another inspection for 10 years at that property. Or even if they had multiple turnovers in those first 4 years after the inspection, if that new tenant that moved in 3 years and 6 months ago and stays in that property for 10 years from that point, it'll be 13 years and 6 months since we were last in the property to do an inspection. And we were talking earlier about the safety and everything to make sure things are safe. We're not getting in these places that frequently. And as I mentioned back in August, that there's a quarter of the population that our inspection staff have never been in the city of Hagerstown. So even though we've been 15 years into a program, we have not inspected a quarter of them. And that does not mean that we've had long tenancies. It goes back to the same thing with paying licensing fees. You just don't call us and then just see if you get called as far as, you know, if you didn't have report and inspection.
Why
And
don't
as
we make it uniform and just make A and B both 48 months?
As looking at other jurisdictions, as we like to do to compare things, that 36 months is actually a very lenient time. Most places are 1 year.
Just gave you an example about how you're not gonna get into someplace for 13 years.
Correct, because of the way the current program is written.
Okay, so if you could make that 48 months as opposed to 13 years, isn't that better? I mean, at least you get in.
But you're asking for 36.
Correct.
Personally, I'm good with 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's just me.
Is this an ordinance? Or what are we doing?
Time to.
This would be an ordinance,
Okay.
yes.
We'll make sure I can veto it. That's-
If we haven't been in, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And we're suggesting that while we're changing the interior to every 3 years when we inspect, we're also suggesting at the same time extending the exterior inspection from annually to 3 years, so that we're just doing it all at once.
Which you could do at 48 months.
Yeah, or 56,
All
or
at
90, or
once.
whatever, but yeah. we're
Or
suggesting it go-
annually.
We're suggesting it go together.
As what we said before, that, you know, out of the 90 jurisdictions, out of the topmost, out of the 100 populous one, 90 rental licensing programs, ours is the 81st as far as frequency for inspections. So we're being very lenient on those. If we changed it to just 36 months, we're only moving to 75th. We're not becoming an overly restrictive jurisdiction. We're being very lenient with our time period. Most jurisdictions actually require an annual licensing program, and actually for you to even obtain your license, the inspection must occur before the license is issued.
I'm trying to make it easier on staff, Paul.
36 months would be very easy on staff.
48 would be a lot easier.
But if we made this change, we would also be at the properties less frequently in terms of exterior inspections instead of annual. We're suggesting going to every 3 years, so that the staff would just handle it all when they get there, rather than at the property every year exterior and then every 3 years or whatever for interior.
So for the quarter of the properties that we have not been in, it's been 15 years. Can't we just issue a letter saying we're gonna come inspect it?
We'd have to
Our
change the
ordinance does
code.
not say that.
Right.
I mean, I think after 15 years, I mean, I understand people not wanting inspected every year, but I think 15 years is
And it's the same thing that we
is
had.
a little justified.
We had in the last 4 years, we had over 4,000 turnovers that require an inspection, and only 2,000 of them were reported to our office. So people are not calling for the inspections at all.
And it's people you would consider good landlords.
So basically, the whole turnover idea is, we're saying eliminate turnover, just do a 36-month or a 48-month or whatever inspection.
Yeah, systematic.
I do like Shelley's idea, though, about rewarding good landlords, and maybe if there was, you know, if they,
And I looked into the tiered system that Councilmember McIntyre mentioned down in Baltimore. It has not been adopted by Baltimore. It was just proposed. It goes through like a very similar type of state legislation adoption
It was Loudoun
process.
County, actually.
And so, the thing is that we haven't been in these properties, so we can't even assess them to determine who's good or bad. I would certainly like to explore something once we were able to actually get inside properties to determine are they in compliant or not.
or maybe like, okay, so let's say I call for an inspection because I had tenant turnover, you're in my property, there's no violations, I'm good to go. 2 years later, I call for an inspection, tenant turnover, you come in, I'm good to go. And then whatever the next uniform time for you to come in, you come in good to go. That's 3 inspections I got, my property's good to go, I haven't violated anything, I've done what you've asked me to do, so maybe my fees get waived.
Or
for a year-
reduced.
Or reduced, or something.
And everyone starts on the same tier.
I don't necessarily mean, I mean like a tiered, I just mean, you know,
Same,
hey,
whatever.
you've done what we've asked you to do this amount of times, and now we're gonna waive your fee, or reduce it, or we're not gonna come inspect your unit for whatever the circumstance may be. Just some way to reward people to actually call, because people aren't calling, like you said, so we need, and the people that are, I mean, like Lou said earlier, why would you if you can just kind of let it
If we
skate by?
changed the
So-
code, they wouldn't have to call, we would call them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe still, even, you know, if someone is keeping their property the way that it should be, and they're meeting the criteria, then maybe we could do them, you know, a thank you.
So we had 4,000 turnovers and only 2,000 inspections.
Only 2,000 reported.
Only 2,000 reported that they had turnovers. I know we had 4,000 turnovers.
Through our utility system. And that's only counting where we service power.
Well, and that's only counting the ones that are in that particular name.
We don't reach out to
Tenant
them
versus
and tell them,
landlord.
hey, you had a turnover and we're coming to inspect you.
We could employ more people full-time and have to hire more staff
That's
just to
okay,
handle
never
that.
mind then. See, I was trying to save staff time before
We
with the
do reach
48
out,
months,
when we
but,
discover these, we do reach out.
sorry.
When we discover these turnovers that should have generated inspection, we do reach out. It's just a matter of whether we're catching them all.
And Paul, it was actually not Loudoun County, it was Minneapolis.
Minneapolis did propose the original one that they currently do on Baltimore, structure a
Right.
program off of Minneapolis's,
Yeah.
but has not been
Yeah,
adopted
the way they
yet.
adopt laws in Baltimore is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
can
we
imagine.
researched that.
I can imagine. But it's a good concept, you know, reward for good behavior, incentivize.
And I don't disagree with that, and I think once we
Yeah.
get a better concept of what is out there, we could probably
Yeah.
really look at a program, something along those lines.
We're looking
I
at.
agree, I don't think that we're there, I think it's well-intentioned, but I guess for me, I'd rather improve the solidification of the relationship before implementing a process like that.
Absolutely.
Simply because I can see we do that, you know, while we're in this process of initial period of things that have a number of unknowns, and then we're going to be subject to that same subjective response from folks to say, you know, hey, I'm sending you an email to let you know I got, you know, dinged on this issue and missed my free, you know, my free one, and I just, I think that probability, for me, just makes it less palatable to say, I want to jump into that, you know, as part of this right now.
Okay.
That incentive. That's just my,
But do you think the concept is?
I think the concept is good.
Yeah.
I just don't want to do it out of the gate and then have people
I
coming
think
and
that could be
saying.
phased,
cart before the horse
phased
kind of
in
thing.
after we do the analysis.
Plus, the
and then
fees
we'll-
I think that'll
are
happen.
intended to recapture the costs
Yes.
of the staff. Just something to think about.
Say that, I'm sorry.
The license fees are intended to capture the costs of the labor, the staff.
Yes.
So you know, just like in Minneapolis where they it's higher for a violator of code or, you know, to even make up for it more. To, you know, that building inspection, what Pam had to do that day was, you know, way out of her pay grade, I would imagine, in that house. So, but if a violation like that would incur more fees, it would make up for the time that, you know, and the mental and emotional part that goes along with it.
And addressing the inspection frequency stuff, this would address a lot of the issues that Chief Lohr has brought up with his concerns of overcrowding and no smoke detectors and situations that made unsafe for firefighters going into situations and our hoarding situations that we have.
And I think moving the exterior to 36 and the interior down to 36, I think is a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, maybe-
I just do. I think moving both is a reasonable compromise to what you're trying to achieve and to address some of the concerns, especially on the exterior things that we hear from landlords, you know, just as we do the other items. So I think this is a reasonable compromise.
And just to let council know, I am visiting other jurisdictions to see how they currently do these processes for inspections so that we can have an understanding, taking staff with me to other jurisdictions to do them on a frequent basis like this.
We appreciate that. That's great.
And those that license hotels as well.
Yes. Just a couple pictures of, just to kind of show what some of the unsafe, unsanitary conditions are that we've come across inside of occupied dwelling units, because again, the way the current ordinance is done, it's only a vacancy, so we have situations that are unsafe. And then the last item that we have here for you tonight that sure Michelle's happy to hear me say, is that the rental facility program here, the one thing that we currently have is we do not have an exemption for people that meet the PEP standard, the Partners in Economic Progress. If you currently renovate a property to the PEP standard, you are immediately put into a rental licensing program. Now, if you are a new construction property, we exempt you for 4 years. But if you are renovating a property to the PEP standard, you immediately go into the property because you're not new construction. So it is creating a exemption for someone that totally renovates the properties, and we gave you some examples, some of which you've heard in recent presentations from other staff about how these properties have renovated them to a higher standard, and we would like to exempt those properties for 36 months and changing the new construction to 36 months, just so that everything's consistent across the board.
See, there you go again. You went from 48 to 36 for new construction. And why wouldn't you just give those who have qualified under the city's PIP program 48 months?
We're just trying to be consistent in terms, just having a single time frame. That's
Well, you know,
all.
you've been consistent. If 2 would have been 48 months and 4 had been 48
Yeah.
months.
Whichever it is, it would be helpful if they matched. If we go to
Yeah.
48, have everything 48. If it's 36, have everything 36.
Like I said, looking at other jurisdictions, we're very lenient even at 36.
We want to be better, don't we?
We're better than 75 others,
That's right.
out of 90.
Why not be
We're
better
so
than
nice.
80?
Look how nice we are.
Be 48 months.
Or 19
About
others.
the tenant-
On new construction, I mean, come on.
No, we're not.
For the, right of entry.
Okay, as Kathy mentioned on the memo, I might have missed the right of entry portion of it. The right of entry, it's a clause in the ordinance that would give the city the authority to access these units if denied access from a landlord or a tenant that would not allow us then to place. That'd be through an administrative warrant. But also, in the same respect, looking at other ordinances, taking the best practices of them, is also including a section for the city to obtain a warrant for the landlord to make those repairs once we make those, once we identify what is a code violation. At times, we'll hear from landlords where they're not getting back in to make the repairs and calling us asking for more time. This would be a way to give the landlords a tool working through with the city to get access to those units when being denied from the tenant.
Good.
Crickets.
Yeah.
And that's all that we have for some updates.
Thank you. That was quick.
That was a lot.
So if you're in favor of these things, of which we were putting check marks on, the next step would be come back.
So you're all in favor of the rights to entry thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
we have to be.
Then the next step would be to come back with an ordinance for you to review and then introduce, adopt the whole process.
Okay, thanks.
Wayne and I
You're
may
still
be
here,
leaving, but
Kathy.
Kathy's still here.
Kathy, so basically, this three-page memo boils down to the last page.
We're recommending you repeal the program.
Yes, I have no problem.
Yes, I'm good with that. Everybody else good with
I
that?
would like to complain and moan about it, but I'm okay with it.
So everybody's okay.
Okay, so we'll have to come up with something.
Made that
that's
simple
Legal
for you.
document, so it can be repealed.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, Michelle, you're up. Yeah.
Good evening.
Repealing. Repealing.
Repealing, yeah.
I think we'll be really brief tonight, right, Valerie?
Well, I had 7 pages of notes, but what do you think? Well,
7 pages
Just-
of notes, my
just
God.
kidding.
You wrote a
Just as a-
68-page
I'm just kidding.
city administrator's column.
Harold Mail is gone, so if we're gonna go over the budget, I'd rather do it tonight. I'm
Well,
just-
it's a very high,
More than tonight, yeah.
very high-level summary. So just as a reminder, our budget process, we start in like November, and when I say we, mostly in November, it's my department trying to get together the information on the employees and the payroll. The month of December is the departments, so all of December, they have from the 1st until the 31st to actually put in their initial request for a 5-year CIP, capital improvement projects, and also to put in their initial fiscal year 19 budget. And in addition to that, they also put in where they think they're going to be June 30. So they also put in where they think they're going to be for the end of fiscal year 18. Once we compile all that information in January, we meet separately, 2 separate times. First, we sit down and review with the departments and the city administrator and my staff their initial request for capital, and then we follow up and do the next week and a half, 2 weeks, reviewing what they put in for their operating request. By the time January is over, we start trying to balance the budget in the general fund side in February and try to have that all finished by middle of February so that we can start building the budget document that's before you now. And it literally takes a month and a half to actually do that. I think Jennifer was counting and it was up to 470 pages in this document this year. So we know it's a lengthy document. So here we are, it's March 31st. I did include a very high level, just an overview of the different things that we can hit sections within the budget book from now until the end of May. Included in there, May 15th, when we're at this point anticipating that we would have our public hearing, as well as introduce both our tax rate ordinance and our budget ordinance. And the goal would be by May 22nd to have those ordinances adopted for both the budget and the property tax rate.
so that we are in compliance with our charter with an approved budget by the end of May, which will be effective July 1st. That's pretty much our process in a nutshell. The document, the very first section, Section 1, which Valerie is going to hit just a couple of quick things. The very biggest portion of that document is the 37-page electronic document that Valerie had sent out. I have also printed and have included extra additional copies at the table that we can keep here for the next couple of months in case anybody else is interested. The entire document is online. The 37 pages are not any different from what is printed in the book. Those 37 pages are very high level. We hit all funds. We hit city administrator goals and priority items. We hit city staffing levels. There is a couple of schedules. By the time you get to about page 15, 16, we actually start on citywide schedules and financial statements. Then we do some citywide staffing charts. That's about 4 or 5 pages, and from there, we concentrate and do some very high-level summary information on general fund, revenues and expenses, and some of our bigger funds throughout the book. But again, those 37 pages really do hit a lot of information that is housed in higher, more details throughout the rest of the budget document itself, which we'll try to cover.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. I did have quite a few notes, but I will kind of shorten it a little bit tonight. Because again, knowing you just got the book over the Easter holiday weekend, we weren't going to get into a lot of details tonight, but I wanted to give you just some high-level highlights of the message. First of all, I have to acknowledge the senior leadership team and the work that they've done in all those months that Michelle talked about. It's, we start in December, back and forth with the department heads, with Michelle, with her team, so I commend and thank them for that work, and especially, of course, Michelle and her department is the lead department for building of the budget. Basically, the basic issue before us is the sustainability of our finances and our city services. We last met with you in February, I think it was February.
It was the very first week of February.
And, we had a pretty significant deficit at that time, and basically, we had promised you that we would get back to work and we would bring you a balanced budget. That's where we are. We had specific challenges to that. Part of the challenge was the 2018 constant yield notice came in very flat, did not get the lift that we expected. Due to our limitations to diversify our revenue sources, we don't have a whole lot to do, or we have a heavily reliance on property taxes. And in this year's budget, property taxes is going to represent 69.2% of your revenue for your general fund. We tried continuation of current types and service levels. In reviewing the operational items with our department heads and knowing how many years that we've deferred purchases and programs, and we really couldn't find any substantial operational cuts without full elimination of services, meaning full elimination of staff and everything that goes along with those services. So we kept those things in. Another challenge was, of course, the increasing cost of our wages and benefits for our workforce, continuing to recognize the 3 unions that we had our multi-year contracts with last year. Of course, we maintained all of those items in the budget. We are also currently in the process of negotiating with our firefighters at this time. And we also wanted to recognize our non-union staff. So there's items in there including that. We also wanted to include and keep in such things as community events and amenities, parks, pools, golf course, contributions to the Maryland Theater and to UIP project. So those were just some of the challenges when we went back to the drawing board. But we did go back to the drawing board, and we worked, and we came up with a combination of looking at all of those challenges, and substantially you have the balanced budget that's in front of you. That budget does include a tax increase that generates $776,000. We reduced general fund transfers to our capital improvements programs by $544,000. We reappropriated $240,000 of general fund reserves for you. We were able to recognize a health insurance surplus, and we did have other decreases in various operational items. So again, I only mentioned these are, we'll get into all of those things in more detail, but that's how we got there. That's how we worked over those last few months, and that's how we got there. Of course, these deliberations are your time to go through the budget in as much detail as you want, to have as many meetings as you want, and, you know, continue to work with us, either accept the proposed budget as it is, make some changes to it. I mean, this is definitely your time to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposed tax revenue increase. We put it in the budget as a dollar amount, and that is $776,000. The additional revenue is necessary to maintain existing city services at our current levels, to provide salary enhancements and approved in collection bargaining that had been approved in the collection bargaining contracts, covering the increasing cost of employer-paid benefits, and investing in capital and infrastructure. There's a chart on page 4 of the budget message that is a really nice chart. It actually reflects exactly what every tax dollar is spent on. So, like, I believe, I'm not looking at it, but I think it was like 54 cents is public safety. Yes. So for every dollar, it shows you where your money goes.
And again, just a reminder, so this is a new chart, but this chart is only showing how each property tax dollar
Right.
is spent, because we have to also recognize we have other things like charges for services and grants, some other things, and that's been excluded from this chart on page 4.
Yeah, any of my comments tonight really are reflective in section 1. That's really where I am tonight. So of course, now we know there's several options for implementing a $776,000 property tax revenue increase. In terms of a straight line increase, that we bring in about $258,000 per 1 cent. That would represent about a 3-cent tax increase. And of course, we've had discussions about tiered tax rates. Creating a tier between all non-owner occupied versus owner occupied will also be something that you can talk about, and another option for you. There's an employee wage adjustment history listed on page 7. That's a historical chart that goes back and shows all the adjustments over the years for the employees and the unions and the non-union employees as well. And it actually shows you at the bottom of that page what we have projected in there for fiscal year 19. And that is, of course, keeping our word on our contracts with our 3 groups and negotiating with the firefighters, and some step changes or some changes for our non-union employees. Beginning on page 8 through 14, there's listings of various items key to the proposed budget. We'll discuss a lot of those over the next 2 months. I just want to mention a few things. Your proposed general fund revenue represents $45.409 million, and for fiscal year 19, that represents a 3.2% increase over your fiscal year 18. Your proposed fiscal year 19 budget reflects a 3.3% increase in general fund expenditures over fiscal year 18. Details of that can be found on pages 20 and 21. General fund fiscal year 19 proposed budget reflects total cost of wages and benefits at $30.194 million, and is very close to our largest revenue source, which is of course the property taxes, which represent $30.642 million, a difference of $448,000. So every year we see, and we make comment that, you know, our largest revenue source is going towards the wages and benefits of our workforce. We are a service provider, and that absolutely makes sense, because that's basically where that money is going to go. The fiscal year 19 proposed budget includes 477 full-time positions, with 331 of those in the general fund. But there are unfunded positions, so we have a total of 452 funded positions citywide.
And that's full-time positions.
Full-time positions, correct, Michelle, thank you. And there's a schedule of that on page 19 in our budget book. Michelle might want to talk a little bit more about that schedule in a minute. We also have included a chart of amenities that is supported by the general fund on page 10. That's a very interesting chart. It shows our amenities, it shows the revenues that we bring in for those amenities, and it shows the expenditures. And, you know, amenities are those sort of things. They're not necessarily there in a community to make money, but they do show how much money they cost. That is on page 10. Let me see here. The city's capital improvement program for fiscal year 19 is at $29.8 million, and that's a 30% higher than the $22.8 million from fiscal year 18. That goes to show a lot of items that we had to defer from last year, items that we still need to do. They're still part of our projects, and you know, that's where you're going to see a 30% increase there. We have included $2,043,000 in one of our SIP line items for the plaza portion of the urban improvement project. See, the city has had a history of deferring vehicles over the past several years in efforts to lower cost. While the fiscal year 19 budget includes vehicles and equipment, for our aging equipment, it's important to note that there are no new additions to our existing vehicle fleet, but only vehicle replacements. Overall, fiscal year 19 includes about $4.2 million in vehicle and equipment replacements. Relying on highway user revenue, we have about $1.2 million in pavement preservation. Of course, that is always one of those things where we're only going to spend what we get out of the highway user revenue. So we're projecting that right now at about $1.2 million. You know that we have already issued an RFP for a stormwater rate study, and that is ongoing. Staff has already been working with with Amex Foster Wheeler, who's our vendor for that, and staff is working to get that done. So we'll be coming back to you with the information from the rate study, but included in the SIP for this is about $480,000 for stormwater retrofit projects already, and also the $620,000 for the street sweepers that you all had just approved last month.
I think that $400,000 includes part of those,
Yes, okay.
or portion thereof.
The utility rates, we're in a 5-year plan, and those rates will just continue on. We don't have to go, this is our last year of the 5-year plan, so next year we'll have to be doing the rate study again for our utilities. July 1 included 2% annual increases for our water customers. For wastewater customers, the 5-year schedule included a 12% rate increase in fiscal year 15, followed by 4% increases in fiscal year 16 and 17, and then a 2% increases in fiscal year 18 and 19. And we had a new contract for wholesale energy that was negotiated in fiscal year 17. So again, even with those rate increases, our utility customers still enjoy some of the lowest utility costs in the area. On page 12, you'll see highlights of capital equipment projects for public works, police, and fire. And on pages 13 and 14 are highlights of capital and equipment for your utility, your water, your wastewater, and your utility funds. And also some information about the Community Development Block Grant, the Economic Redevelopment Fund, and the Property Maintenance Fund, all of which we will get to discuss at some point during our review. I would imagine that the majority of your time you're going to want to discuss general fund, but certainly, again, that is your prerogative, and we will spend as much time as you need on that fund as well as any other fund. So that's really just very high level of the real basics that's in your budget and how we got there and how we were able to balance the budget from where we were with you in February.
So again, don't want to go into too much details because I appreciate that everybody said, came from another job and has sat here for 2 hours in the previous conversations that weren't necessarily light and easier topics right before budget. I'm not sure how I drew the short straw this evening. Anyway, in all seriousness, so section 1, those first 37 pages, starting on about page 15, you'll start to see that it's more graph, financial statement, chart-driven, numbers-driven. After you get past those 37 pages in section 1, we also do include goals, mayor and council goals, departmental goals. And then section 2 is literally one income statement, so I'm going to skip over that. Section 3, 4, 5, and 6. These sections are more specific, where you'll find a little bit further detail on individual departments or areas, program summaries, departmental goals. For instance, in section 3 of the general fund, you'll be able to see breakdown specifically in revenue, and then you'll be able to see things like police, a whole page, an area that's devoted to police and their key performance indicators, as well as their departmental summary. And then numbers and staffing for each of those areas as well. We do the same thing in the next section. Section 4 is enterprise funds. So just a reminder, enterprise funds is electric, water, wastewater, parking, golf course, and property management. Same type of information is available in section 5 for special revenue funds. The biggest of our special revenue funds is our CDBG, Community Block Grant, and Economic Redevelopment Fund. From there, I would say section 7, financial projections section. So instead of seeing everything to a whole dollar, everything is rounded to the nearest thousands, and that's our 5-year look of where we think we're going to be in general fund. We provide a little bit more detail. There's a page there that specifically just a breakdown on salary, wages, and employee benefits. It's one of my charts I will reference frequently. And then the capital improvement program in section 8, we do not call that our capital improvement fund because it's not just general fund projects. It is literally our entire infrastructure capital projects for the entire city. The general fund is in there, but then again, so is all of our other funds. And then section 9 is their user fee schedule, and at the very end, we have some of our key fiscal policies, as well as a glossary. In the very, very, very front of the book, there is a high-level table of contents, so that if you need to find something a little quickly, hopefully that'd be beneficial. But I didn't plan to spend too much time on any one chart, especially given how lengthy it is and how the mayor looks. I actually know the mayor has he has done his work. He's already sending me questions, and he's already found numbers on his own in the budget book, so I know he's been lucky, so that's great.
So question on page 4 of section 1.
Yes.
We had talked prior about the possibility of non-owner occupied
Versus owner
tiers
occupied.
versus owner occupied, and we had I know we were having some software issues. We can't differentiate between a 4-unit versus a single unit. Is that going to be a constraint for this budget cycle?
Yes.
Yes.
We did make some progress. So let's look at that chart on section 4.
Section 1, page 4, and you're looking at the
Section
top.
1,
This
page 4
chart
at the top.
specifically that talks about the tax tiers.
So, at the top, you have your R residential, your townhouse, and your U's, and those are owner occupied. So of course, the idea would be, just assuming no change to that. So then you go down to the non-owner occupied. So we knew that at one point apartments worked. We had a way in our system to pull out apartments, but we started to have a problem with, if you look at our residential OO at the top and then our residential NOO at the bottom, we got a hang up there. And we realized, hey, we might not be able to do this. This might not be something that can work. Luckily, staff, Scott and his IT team worked with our provider, and clearly, we can now have different rates in any of those non-owner occupied sections. But you cannot drill it down any further.
Than what is shown.
So if you say residential, non-owner occupied, say, let's just look at residential owner occupied, that's just gonna stay at, 942, okay? You go down to residential non-owner occupied, I don't know, you want that to be 1.052, a 12% increase. That would be every residential non-owner occupied, from single families to duplexes to whatever. You cannot differentiate any more than that, from that.
Same with apartments.
But these would be for rentals, so you would still have rentals that are single families. And they are still rentals, and they meet all the definitions and the issues that you've talked
Yeah,
about.
For me, it's more than one unit.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
The way I could justify to myself or to anyone else, the increase is the additional draw on public services. If I have a 4 or 5, 6 unit rental
Sure.
property, then technically I've got 4 or 5, 6 times the use of police services, fire services, trash, and I can justify doing that. If it's a single-family home that just happens to be a rental, it's the same draw on services that,
I think we're all in agreement on
yeah.
that.
It's too bad the paper isn't here.
And actually, I think that was one of the things that we were hoping to cover first, because really and truly, that's going to be the biggest question.
But we are lucky enough then, so say that's the decision of the body. We are still lucky enough then, if you still are interested in a tiered tax rate, that you could keep the R, non-owner occupied and owner occupied at a same rate.
But we're not.
No, I'm saying you
Same rate.
Same
Don't
rate,
change
you
it.
can,
Leave it
don't
flat.
change that, but you would have the ability
Ability then
to
to
change
change
M's,
Apartments.
M's.
apartments, townhouses,
Well, not
residential
townhouses,
con.
Not townhouses.
Well, I'm just saying, you would have the ability to pick from any of those and
Up to.
change. Or you could just do apartments, or however you want to do that. We did, test through the whole billing cycle, we tested that. Any of those can be at a different rate than what your owner occupieds are.
And the difference between a residential condo and a commercial condo, what's an example of that? That you or a CC under the non-owner occupied?
I don't know if I
Where
have
are you
an
looking
answer to
at?
that.
What's a
I'm looking,
commercial condo?
what's a commercial condo versus a residential condo, U and CC?
I'm just
I
gonna
think it's the-
assume that residential condo means individual
Owner.
owner occupied, and commercial would mean an entity
An entity
Owns it.
owns it,
owns it.
yeah.
So for me,
Okay.
for me, it's pretty easy to say townhouses are off the list. You're not gonna have a multifamily townhouse. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? The expectation isn't.
Right.
And residential condo means that person basically has bought that.
It's a single
unit.
owner,
So for
yeah.
me, they'd be off the list. And the big one, which is the one we can't differentiate at the moment, is residential. And I'd rather leave that off the list until we can, until we do have the capability to drill down on it and leave the other three. Because they are assumable to be your multi-unit
So that would be the M apartments, the
RC,
RC,
which is residential commercial, which is 40 more units, and the CC, which is a commercial condominium. And I imagine there can't be much of them.
yeah, I'm trying to think of an example.
With a commercial condominium, wouldn't that just be a single person running a single?
It'd be a different form of I got it. If you want to take it off, like I said, it don't matter any.
So what you changed?
I mean, you're talking about a whopping 20 grand.
Yeah, it's very,
But the
very
top
little.
two, you can differentiate, and then you come back next year and you differentiate the
Once
third one.
we get software changes made and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know at this point in time with the system we have, whether we could get there or not. But
You got a year to work on.
yes,
Right.
yes, no, you're right.
I think
And
Scott-
there-
Modifications,
and
and we are planning an upgrade,
there
so
is an
that's all
upgrade,
very
yeah, see,
good.
there's,
But Scott said that they had put tickets in with the software vendor
Yes, he did.
yeah, yeah, but that was to get us to be sure that we were able to do what I just explained.
Okay.
Kristen, I think that's.
So then the goal is, if there's 776,000 additional revenue in the fiscal year 19 budget, if we look at just those two categories and look at the dollar increase it provides,
Cutting it in half at least.
Okay, which is
All right.
$313,000.
then where are we making the additional? Increasing the overall? And so then there's where the rest of the
Or where
conversation.
we're making the reduction.
Yeah, that's the other question.
Or it's not 12%.
What are we increasing? To make it
15.
This is just an initial conversation, nothing's set in stone
I know,
tonight.
but I was not,
It's okay.
apparently was not following.
You're increasing property tax 3 cents to make the 776 across the board.
Or,
Across the
Yeah, I
board.
understand that, or what was
or
the or?
these tier taxes. So if we don't do all 776,000 from a tier tax,
Right.
and if we do some of that, then
You're
are
getting
we?
half of it from this if we go with the two categories.
You're getting
Well,
251
No, you're.
at
How
12%.
much of an increase?
No, I was looking at 15.
You're talking about the
You're getting
M's,
315.
the M's and the
I
RCs.
didn't know how high you were going.
Hey, that's still low for me, I can tell you that.
15%?
Yeah.
Let's put that in context.
Let me give you, well,
That's about
can I please give the,
$4 a unit.
yeah, can I
Yeah.
please give the example? I just worked this example yesterday for a woman who owns a property up on South Prospect Street, a 7-unit apartment building, and I worked it for her, and at 12.5% is what I used yesterday, because I used the lower of the percentages. At 12.5, for her 7-unit rental, it would mean an increase of $3.25 per rental
Right.
unit per month.
I understand that. I've been sending out the emails too for what people's, but,
Yeah.
What's
So-
the perception, once do they reply?
yeah, I mean, they understand it. You have to understand, we raised taxes $2.7 last year, was it? And that's an average of what, $30 a household, and we might, you know, you would have thought we lit the city
All we
on
did
fire.
last year was constant.
Constant yield, constant yield.
We only did against, yeah.
Well, it was my first experience, so
The only
you,
people that thought we were lighting the house on fire was Councilmember Porterman,
wow.
which led the charge with Mayor Grucci, who didn't want to raise taxes at all. There weren't, other than I think one citizen, I don't think we had anybody come in here and say how nuts we were for doing it.
What's somewhat ironic is the 2.8 cents we didn't get is about what we need, is
And-
3 cents
Yeah.
this year.
And I, just as I said last year, you know, we need to stop talking in percents
Right.
and cents. Because all of that does is provide those media entities and those opposition entities outlets to sell that information in a manner that the average citizen doesn't understand, that scares them to death. And I use this example. With 20,000 properties, $30 million, the average taxes, on the average property is $1,400, which, if you break it down at 0.941 cents, is about $14.80 per penny. So when you apply that to the 3 cents you're talking about, that's roughly $45. If you look at the triennial assessment, 80% of the properties have decreased. Use me as an example, just my property as an example, from last triennial increase to this one, I've seen a decrease of a net, I think, $68 in taxes. Even if you apply this $45 in my second year of that assessment, I'm still $20 to the good, meaning you're getting less money from me now than you did 3 years ago. And when you then break down that $45
$3.75 a month.
and apply 54% of that to public safety, and folks say, well, you're wasting on this and that, you say, no, $420,000 of that $776,000 increase is going to police and fire,
Yeah.
to your public safety. So, you know, almost, you have what, almost 2 pennies of your 3 pennies that you're talking about is going to public safety. And I don't see anybody sitting at this table that's not gonna honor the contracts with the unions that we have adopted and not apply the full weight of that to them. And I'm more than happy to sit here and listen to measures to find that other 300,000, which, you know, this is one measure that does that in one fell swoop. But we're already we're already almost a half a penny less than the constant yield rate, which is another $125,000 of that. So really, you're talking about a shortfall of about $200,000, or less than a penny, or to the average person that pays $15 a penny, less than $1 a month. I mean, that's what you're really talking about, but we don't talk to people in that way. And so we'll hear all the scary information about a 3-cent tax increase, but nobody knows what that means. We'll talk about 2.7% on the tax rate. Nobody knows what that means. Everybody will be real concerned about it. No one at all will come in and care that the only thing that is actually going up is the same thing that's going up everywhere else, which are the utility rates, and we'll spend a fraction of time talking about something that's actually increasing, because we look at that for some psychological reason as a self-supporting business, and we don't look at those other services that we provide through taxes as that same exact thing.
Right.
But those same folks that will be terrified of that will say, you know, we understand that's a business. You're trashing your electric and your water and sewer, but there'll be the same that say, but you got to have these police and fire services and you know and those things, and you say, okay, well, you know, on that side of the business, 54% of the increase is going to that, and I think that's an appropriate way to tell folks that, because clearly that's what
We put
folks are
a
interested in.
small chart in on page 3, section 1, page 3, that was just looking at the $776,000, what it would actually mean depending upon your, you know, a house. So a value at $150,000 is $3.75.
People like to know where their money's going, right? And
Which is the reason that we put that on
Chart
page
in,
3 and
yep.
then immediately did the new chart. for
And,
page
and I think, to his point, when you spell out, because you do it all the time online, that this X amount of dollars are going to public safety and everything else, I think people are talked off the ledge, because all they want to talk about when they talk about their money is the pod and the mural and the walkway to nowhere, as they call it. So when you can put it in perspective, it'd be interesting. Stop laughing. If we could put an interactive calculator on the website, follow me for a second, so we could refer people there, and they could put, you know, this is my house value. It would calculate out what your.
Then you'd have to put the website for the state of Maryland.
That's
Yeah,
Oh, okay, well.
yeah, put that too, so that way they can look up the property.
Okay, we'll put a link to it, but let's just, that pie chart.
That website's hard to use.
That pie chart you have in there would be great for an average citizen. So if I put, my house was assessed at $150,000, and I can see, all right, 700 of my dollars is going to public safety, 100 is going here, 100 is going here.
And 87 cents went to the pod.
Yes,
Actually,
and,
not
yes.
That's what it was per person.
Not even
Yeah.
that.
Not even that.
But if you amortize it over 100 years, it's more like a eighth of a cent.
I'm just-
But I think that visual would
Didn't we
be,
break it when we moved?
Jesus. I think that visual would be beneficial for our citizens to
Yeah.
see where their money, everyone wants to be transparent, and let's be honest, no one trusts the government. We can tell them no one trusts government, it's just the way it is. So if they have a visual that they can see where their money is going and where the increase is going, I think it would be beneficial. It can't
And
be that
again,
hard.
it's only an increase if their assessment
Right.
changed, and it could very well not be.
Mayor,
So-
may I propose that,
We continue discussions on the budget next
based
week.
upon past experience, we have hours more of discussion on the budget, and maybe this would be a good time, 5 after 7, to.
Cut it off.
Tonight.
I agree. I'm in.
Um,
City Administrator, you have any final comments?
no, I don't, Mayor.
Good job, by the way, on the budget.
Good job.
Thank you.
Shelley?
So I, yesterday, spent the day in the utilities department downstairs with the customer service reps on cutoff day. And I have to give the gigantic shout out to those customer service reps and to Beth. And it was eye-opening, the amount of work that they do. We went at 7:20 down to the Hagerstown Light Department, and all the linemen were, you know, graciously accepting their work orders and helping for the cutoffs. And the people that came in, at one point in time, there were probably 17 people in line and 29 to 30 people in a queue on hold. So these customer service reps are sitting there and they're getting people that are walking up, paying their bills, complaining about their bills, complaining about getting cutoffs, while they're monitoring emails that are coming in, taking fax payments. And they remained calm and collected and friendly and knew their job. I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. The only thing that I can say is that the amount of money that is owed to the city, and there's a business that actually owes a lot that is scheduled for cutoff in our downtown area, and the only thing that I can say is that it sure would be nice for them to either get a self-serving kiosk so people could come in and, pay their bill. I talked to the IT department, and I know that they are at least exploring some options. I think that, to have someone focusing on collections, whether that means that you put someone in a kiosk or you have a kiosk there and you alleviate one of the CSRs in order to help them focus on collections, I'm pretty sure this business just doesn't know, and it's so much work for these guys to do. It was extremely impressive. So the rest of the week is going to be even worse for these guys and girls downstairs. So if you guys could just, say thanks, I'm sure that they would really appreciate it. They do an amazing job, and it's a lot of work. So that's what I did Monday. What'd you do, Lou?
As we discuss tax increases and go through all the things that you go through, I was thinking about the state of the county. I'm thinking about the different approaches. So as we're in the absolute height of a mental health and substance abuse crisis, the health department shuts down its outpatient programs because they're not funded.
Until June 30th, but yeah.
While we collectively are aware of how underfunded our fire and rescue is in the county, they continue to go unfunded. But the county's very proud that they don't raise taxes. And, we could start laying off firefighters and police officers and closing down parks and be very proud that we don't raise taxes. And candidly, I would much rather take the approach we take, which is sustain services that are vital to our citizens, and treat this the way, as Kristen says, folks treat our utilities as a business, and we've got to pay our bills.
Awesome.
Just to echo what you were saying, at this morning's State of the County, I was kind of marveling also at all the statements about no increases in taxes for umpteen years, and then with the recent article in the Herald Mail about the fire service and all the things going on there, which I think you commented quite a bit on, Kristen. And I had a side discussion with Chief Lohr today too on that. I think that's something in the whole budget process here that we're going through. We've got to figure out how to address it. There's got to be something that we can do, because it's out of control, it seems to me. That's my 2 cents.
Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, I would only say as it relates to, and I didn't attend the State of the County, so I don't know firsthand what was said or what the state is, but clearly, when you see that article and then you see comments that you simply expect, that sort of a vast number of folks say, how in the heck can you charge me? I'm already paying you to do that. And then you got these companies out there and they're sort of, have to unfairly defend themselves to say, no, that's not right. And by the way, here are the facts and figures. And then you get sort of the extremes of the argument going. And then add to that complexity, you've got a city like ours who is devoting, I don't know, 37 cents of every
tax dollar, I guess, to that, effort, who then gets sort of rolled into that mix, and folks don't understand, municipal jurisdictional boundaries as it applies to that, and it all gets messy, and yeah, you get back to this notion, and I try to explain it as simply as possible, that, the county, if it had to recreate the existing fire system tomorrow, it cost them $175 million to build new buildings, to buy new equipment, to man the stations that these volunteers have been doing for decades, and they don't have that ability. And it costs those volunteer stations about another $10 to $15 million annually from the county to get up to the appropriate level of speed, if you will, of the things that they need right now to address their antiquated building issues, to address their equipment aging issues, to address their manpower deficiencies. That's what it would take, but that would require, some level of sort of that autonomy, and independence that existed for decades, to be handed over. And so, they're sort of stuck between that catch-22 of the county can't go it alone and recreate what's existing, and what's existing isn't going to simply, hand over that long, tradition of service to a governmental entity, and they've got to find out where that is. But I agree. I think as far as we're concerned, the conversation at this table is long overdue as it relates to, that specific component of that service provision of fire that we currently provide and our taxpayers pay for, increasingly going to those other areas. Because I can tell you flat out, as a taxpayer, I'm sitting here looking at a budget, you're going to tell me you're going to increase my tax rate 3 cents, and about a third of that is going to go to fire, specifically within that increase of that 54% being applied to public safety. And then you're going to say, you know what? There might be an instance where that paid portion of that service that we have stationed at that particular location isn't going to be in the city because it's out somewhere in the county, providing service, and that's because the county has determined not to raise taxes and provide adequate level of service delivery out in those areas. As a city taxpayer, I got to say, I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's a fair situation. And if the county's not going to provide tax differential on that front, because it says what the city's doing is above and beyond what's necessary, and at the same time then, have that occur, I got to question real hard, if we would do that. We certainly don't do it to that degree with police services or other, planning or engineering or what have you. So what's the difference there? I don't get that. Anything else? Kelly? Emily, sorry.
I think that is a, did you call me Kelly or?
Oh, yeah, I'm brain dead after Michelle came to the table. You know how it is.
Yeah, I do.
Well, where's she at? She left.
Yeah, she's do.
I going.
To Kristen's point, I think that's a conversation that we need to have with the commissioners. I mean, we keep talking about it. I'm sure they don't watch our meetings. So I think send an email, have a conversation. So I think we need to have that conversation. If it's a tough conversation, oh well, but I think we need to have it. And I do want to touch on the health department. I will not build my soapbox and stand on it, but I hope that I am not the only person asking our state leadership why they couldn't come up with $750,000 to fully fund our health department. In addition to that, our senior policy group, through the Governor Hogan opioid appointed funds, Washington County took the largest decrease, although our numbers of overdoses and deaths increased. Why? So now we have a health department that can't service 350 individuals. They were our largest service provider, not just for Hagerstown, but for Washington County. And we took a decrease in funds from the money that was allocated by Governor Hogan. Somebody needs to answer to this, and I hope I'm not the only one that starts asking these questions.
If I'm a guessing person, it's just pure guess, it's probably related to the amount of funding that the county is willing to put into the game.
Well, and
So that if this county provides the lowest amount of funding in the state isn't going to say,
well, we're gonna make up for it where the other counties, then go, that's a good guess that I would have.
Well, I hope when people have issues with the homeless population, the transient population, the mental health issues that we have, and the decreasing workforce, that they remember that at election time. Because all of this is tied together, and now we have 350 people who are scrambling to find services that they need. I'm done.
Thank you, Valerie, for the budget, and thanks to the finance department. And that's all I got.
Good for you.
Lou was hoping for that.
Do you want budget first, next week? Like if
Wanna put me-